5 o'clock having arrived, I will officially call the meeting order. Is the meeting been properly posted and the roll been taken?
Yes.
Item number 2 are approval of the minutes. 2.1 are minutes of the August 1st, 2022 meeting.
Make a motion to approve.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor of the motion signify by stating aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Item number 3 is communications. The joint planning commission / common council meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, September 20th at 6:30 p.m. To announce that. And if there's no other communications, I would move on to item number 4, which
Mr.
is
Chairman,
yes.
I have a question. Have there been any other communications to the city, addressed to the city council and planning commission that have not been distributed to the planning commission? No. Wasn't a memo dated August 19th, 2022 from the county with the title transmitted via email to Brian Wilson for distribution to city council and plan commission members presented to the city? It was presented to the city mayor. You provided it to me. Was it distributed to the plan commission members? Was it in our meeting packet? In the memo, the county representative to the joint review board, and it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6-page memo, outlines concerns the county has and concerning the formation of tax increment district number 6, and intended its reading by plan commission members prior to deliberations by the plan commission. Is there a reason why this wasn't distributed to the plan commission?
An oversight. I thought it was out. I guess not.
How did you think it was out?
I didn't think, well, I thought it was copied to be there, but I didn't realize, I didn't look at the agenda to see that it wasn't there. I didn't notice it at least.
Is there a way to at least
Make a copy.
make a copy now and provide
Well,
it?
but
I mean, I think that should be done.
Yeah.
Anyways, it should have been done.
Yeah, I mean.
I gave it to you because.
Right, because there was a specific question, but it said transmitted by email to Brian Wilson for distribution to the city council and plan commission members. And it says typically it would be expected that this letter would be sent after the organizational meeting, but before any votes are held regarding the amendment of the proposed TID. Because of the current timeline, the letter is being sent early so that you, that is the city council and plan commission members, the addressees, will have an understanding of the county's views on the TID. That's not been provided to us. All that's been provided is a one-sided presentation by the city. I would like to understand why that was withheld.
Because it brings up a lot of questions. If we were gonna vote on this tonight, you didn't know that. I would almost, this will probably come later, but I would almost want to postpone this decision until later.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I'd like to make a motion that we go into recess so that the memo can be copied and then distributed to the planning commission so that we can conduct business.
There's a motion. Is there a second to that? If the point is to see the information, I think the motion was just made to actually provide. I mean, I would think we'd have a second to that, but
I think that there's no second, so the motion dies without a second.
right. So we're still in, we're not in recess, obviously. And the person that can best answer that, and I think to say withheld is different than why wasn't it provided. I don't think the city administrator who's just stepped down to make copies, said it was an oversight on not being provided. I don't think there's a reason why it was, that it was intentionally withheld, but. And again, I gave it to you because it was,
Because you had
the
some
process
questions.
was to
Right.
maybe have you be a public
Right.
member, so I thought others on the commission had gotten it, and the person that can best answer that has stepped up, so.
Could bring us into a recess while.
Well, we can move on to other business if anyone doesn't have an objection, and I can come back to it as well. So. Try someone out.
I think this is a charade.
At a minimum, I think with having a 5-page memo random from the county about this, I think this is something that I haven't seen before. I would hope that we want to look into this a little bit more before making any decisions on making another TID in the city of Delavan. That's just my view at this point in time on this subject.
And I'm pretty sure that somebody probably saw this a lot sooner than at the start of the meeting. And if I had known about it Friday, I would have got it out there, or even today.
Was this, did you receive this?
Yes, I received it.
Did you read the first 2 sentences? So somebody saw it before the meeting today, and that
And
somebody
it
was
was
you.
distributed to several people, sorry.
Who are the addressees on the letter?
I can't read it from here.
The addressees are Dear City Council and Plan Commission members. It said transmitted via email for distribution to City Council and Plan Commission members. And I would repeat one more time, Mr. Chairman, I believe it's a charade to provide to the Plan Commission the document in session, expect them to review it and understand the issues outlined by it as it affects their contemplated action on a proposed tens of millions of dollar TID.
And I appreciate your comments and sentiments. I got this the morning of the joint review informational meeting that we had, and that was the first I had gotten it, which I can't remember the exact date, that was just last week, but it didn't take me that long to get through it and have a general sense of what the county's impression was. So, I mean, I don't think there was any.
I find it
intention.
interesting since you weren't an addressee first.
Oh, I was CC'd on it. I got it. Was the second person CC'd on it.
I'm sorry.
And I'm on the planning commission as well, but,
I'm sorry.
so. I guess I just would have a general question is delaying this tonight gonna, I mean, the only real charade is against this. And wants to just now object to having a meeting on it, and then that's the way that we don't move forward with it, because there's some sensitive timeline.
So
That to me is the charade.
So just so everyone's aware of the timing involved. So the Common Council would have to adopt a resolution creating the TID not later than September 30th for it to have a base value date of January 1st of this year, which is the intention. So if you choose not to act tonight for any reason, I would recommend you still hold the hearing. Just for a couple reasons. One is there has to be 14 days that elapse from the hearing until the common council can act. So if you were to not hold the hearing, we'd have to renotice it. And by the time you've got the deadlines to get it to the paper, it's got to be published as a class 2 notice. We would just simply run out of time. So at a minimum, I'd recommend you proceed with the hearing. If you choose not to hold the hearing, it effectively prevents the city from creating the TID with a January 1st, 22 base value date. It would then by necessity have to advance to next year if the city continues to pursue it.
Mr.
Any
Chairman?
questions? Absolutely.
Yeah, making public policy with a gun held to one's head, in this case, a timeline, is not a wise approach. I would point out, okay, there was a timeline presented to the city in May of 2021 to complete this TID for evaluation in January of 2022. Because of changes in administrative management, because of other priorities, the city chose to wait a year. Okay? The truth behind wanting to get this TID approved prior to the end of this year for evaluation in January 2023 to count as part of the increment has to do with an existing project that's already in ground. Which I would point out, the county identifies in their memo, they have serious problems about whether that project meets the but-for test because it has been completed or initiated without a developer's agreement, without, okay, any evaluation of the return to that company and the requirement for development incentives to that company that would be justified, that would be required to achieve the but-for test. Now, I would point out that whether or not this body acts tonight or a year from, 11 months from now, right? The project in question that the city is encouraging us to act to include, okay, its increment in this new TID, that project's going to be in a TID. It's going to be in TID 4. Okay, so it's
I'm
not
sorry, which project are you referring to?
millennium.
So, and that's in the memo,
It's referenced and the mayor shared with me.
but I asked for time to review the memo, and I can't make any decisions based on the information that you're providing without actually going through the memo.
I'm not asking you to make a decision.
I
I'm
understand
pointing
that.
out that this is a false deadline.
I think the deadline is still relevant. I think the information that we have in order to meet the requirements for the deadline is what we're currently talking about. And it's not part of the agenda that we're looking at. We're talking about the communication. And if there were any communications that were sent to the city, not necessarily the details of said communication. We haven't even gotten there because we can't read it, because we don't have enough time to read it, because there was no second to the motion.
Well, my point is false deadline. We're rushing, as many of these TIFs are rushed. TIDs, excuse me.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I would advise that we've talked about the communication, which is listed under number 3, and whether it's been provided or not. And now I would propose that we move on to number 4.
And yeah, I think, and that's why I asked Todd what your opinion was, and your recommendation is to actually go, I think more can be found out through the public hearing process. And I think that's relevant. So I will move on to item number 4, which is the public hearing review and possible Recommendations, City of Delavan, 4.1 is the public hearing regarding proposed creation of. tax
Point of order,
incremental
Mr. Chairman.
District number 6. the
Point of
proposed-
order.
I'm gonna finish reading the thing before I address your point of order.
I'm sorry, the Robert's rule identifies that point of order interrupts any speech.
Your point of order then?
The public hearing is being conducted without a properly constituted joint review board. Consequently, this public hearing should not be considered either the public hearing of the Plan Commission as contemplated in Wisconsin Statute 66-1105 4A concerning the creation of the district or its boundaries, or Wisconsin Statute 66-1105 4E concerning the proposed project plan. 1, the Joint Review Board failed to appoint a citizen member at its August 26th meeting. Wisconsin Statute 66-1105 4MA requires the public member before the public hearing.
How would you like to?
Yeah,
just
What's the ruling of the chair?
I think I'm gonna.
What's
I'm
the
gonna-
ruling of the
Your
chair?
point is out of order because. I'm
No,
gonna
no,
call
the
on
point
you.
of order has to be addressed by the chair, sir. Do you have a Robert's rule
I'm
in
just-
front of you?
Yes, I actually Googled it.
Okay, so what's your ruling?
My ruling is what I just relayed, which is based on, in fact, if I can call on Todd.
You can't call on anybody. You have to make a ruling.
I just made your ruling was out of order.
Okay, I appeal the ruling of the chair. I appeal the ruling of the chair. The process, if you want to know, if I appeal the ruling of the chair, is that it's left to the members of the committee on whether the chair is correct in identifying that the public hearing can go forward as outlined by statute.
And what I can advise the chair, if I may, Mr. Mayor and Mr. Chairman, is that the city will submit a substantial compliance letter under WSTAT section 66.1105/15, which allows the Department of Revenue to waive procedural irregularities provided they do not impact substantial justice. So what that means is that this, misstep in the process does not result in diminishment of the public's opportunity to be aware of or participate in the process, then I think this can proceed today.
The party impacted is a citizen member, not named.
But that's not a party to the action. So
Citizen member, so specifically, if I could.
That was a recent change, wasn't it?
Specifically-
At the state level.
I would like to just bring the counselor a piece of information, because I don't want the counselor just to be reading the response. The Joint Review Board specifically stated in their meeting that they believed they could bring the voting member up to speed at their voting meeting. So the citizen member has no capability of understanding any of these actions.
they have the ability to bring up to speed at the meeting, they said. So I think it is a procedural irregularity.
I hope you guys don't run into an issue where the Joint Review Board decides not to act because their citizen member, they were not in compliance with the statute.
That would be an issue for down the road.
When's the Joint Review Board meeting scheduled?
We just said on September 20th under communications, we just announced that. this evening.
No, you didn't tell me when the
I
Joint
just said-
Review Board.
I just,
Joint Review Board.
the joint, I'm sorry, I thought. Do we have a date set for the joint review board? Is that in October?
It's
No.
October.
There will be a meeting before then, if we can get an appointment for a citizen member, so that they can get brought up to speed before we have the final meeting.
Do they have a meeting set?
What's the
There
date?
was one day, but it was changed because someone was not.
So the answer is no.
Can you
There is
finish
a
the
date.
answer, please?
I'd have to go read my
October
email.
17th.
Okay, yes, October 17th.
And if you want to be recognized by the chair, just hold your hand up. And I'm sorry, sometimes I don't always look on this way, so just. let me know, I'm not, if you want a question or a comment to make. I appreciate it, because I think that was, as I was making the point, a more recent change in state statutes that I don't know what reference
What's the reference?
that you were making how many years
Sixty-six
ago.
point 1105 15.
That you are,
Substantial compliance.
is that the same? Commissioner, is that the same statute that you were reading? Because there has been a recent change to that. So
66-1105.
And actually-
Is the statute.
So, again, my ruling was that it is,
That there's still an appeal.
go ahead, yeah, I'm,
So you have to hold a vote.
right,
Does
yes. You wanna run the meeting?
no, do you know the form to ask for the?
Yeah, I watched it enough at the state assembly when it's appealed to the chair, actually our own state representative who's town, and so. With that, I wish you like to proceed in my, what's the motion here?
There's an appeal to the chair, so you have to call the question.
Call the question. Maybe we have a roll call?
What's the vote? What's the yes or no for what? Appeal the chair.
As to whether or not.
Whether I'm, yeah,
I'm sorry.
Does the ruling of the chair stand?
Yeah, whether the commission can.
Aye or
proceed
nay?
With the public hearing.
No, that's not what it says. Does the ruling of the chair stand? Aye or nay? Okay.
maybe we have a roll call.
Mr. Cass,
Yes.
Ms. Alder. Aye. Mr. Beazer,
Yes.
Mr. Lima.
Aye.
Mr. Armstrong.
No.
4-1. We'll move on to then 4.1, which is the public hearing regarding the proposed creation of the tax incremental district. Number 6, the proposed boundaries of the district and the proposed project plan for the district. Staff, want to give it, oh, actually, with that, I will actually open up the public hearing at this time, and staff will get us started.
Mr. Todd Taves of Ellers will have a detailed presentation, but I'm going to open up with some comments here. It's my understanding that rumors and speculation are circulating regarding the proposed TID number 6. The source of this chatter has been discussions among members of the town board and town representatives in the Lake Committee for the town of Delavan. I feel that it would be useful to address some of these concerns now before Todd speaks regarding the project plan for the proposed TID. It's possible that some of the concerns raised may have been exaggerated or sensationalized in an effort to stoke fear and paint the city as irresponsible in its planning efforts. I wish to allay those fears by discussing the concerns as I understand them and laying the facts around each one in an effort to, in the interest of transparency. First, the questions have been raised regarding Lake Lawn Resort, its marina, and parcel number 24, which is in the proposed TID. Lake Lawn Resort is currently within the boundaries of TID number 4, which some portions of TID 4, which were not developed during the TID's expenditure period, are part of the overlay area of TID 6. Parcel 24 was a part of TID 4 and is a location for a planned clubhouse and swimming pool that will potentially serve the marina and the Harbor Club development. Development of this parcel will create a tax increment that will help pay for public improvements that will directly impact the safety of travelers on State Highway 50, the new traffic signals at State Highway 50 and the entrance to Lake Lawn and at the intersection of State Highway 50 and County Highway F. Construction is expected to start on the State Highway 50 and County Highway F intersection yet this year, which will be funded by the developers of Harbor Club. They will be reimbursed through the TID for a portion of the cost, while the properties to the northwest and northeast of the intersection will be assigned deferred assessments that will be repaid when the properties are developed, if ever. Specific concerns regarding the development of parcel 24 relate to the impact that development might have upon the lake and watershed through potential runoff, erosion, and other negative impacts. The city of Delavan has development and construction standards that are established through both city ordinance as well as state statutes. Any project which disturbs more than an acre of land is subject to DNR requirements for silt fencing, erosion control, and runoff prevention. The proposed clubhouse will be no different in that regard. Comments have been made that the city should have come to the town and or lake committee to present the plans, describe how we're taking the health of the lake and watershed into consideration and seek input from the town. First, there have been no plans to present. No site plan has been presented or approved, no construction documents have been provided, and no permits have been issued. Regardless, and this is just for the clubhouse in parcel 24. Regardless, no site plan, any site plan will include a stormwater plan that will address the grading of the property and stormwater retention. It should be noted that several stormwater basins and improvements are included in the public infrastructure projects of the proposed TID, including a large regional basin near the northwest corner of the intersection of County Highway F and State Highway 50, which is adjacent to the city's boundary with the town. I'm confident that the final approved plans for the development of parcel 24 will adequately protect the health of the lake and watershed. As for the assertion that the city should have sought input from the town on the plans to develop parcel 24, any part of the development process which will require action by the planning commission will be properly noticed, and you may feel free to come and give your input then as much as anyone who chooses to speak during these proceedings. The city of Delavan does not make a practice of asking for permission or input from the town of Delavan regarding its growth and development any more than the town seeks input or permission from the city. The town has had several proposed or actual development projects along Delavan Lake within the past few years, which the city has not been consulted about, specifically the water's edge renovation and proposed TID for the Shodine property. It's been asserted that without any data being provided, that improvements to the marina that have been recently undertaken by Lakeline will have an impact upon the lake and cost the town more money in marine patrols and mutual aid calls. It's difficult to address this when we have no statistics on daily lake use, frequency of patrols, frequency of mutual aid incidents, etc. It should be noted that with the Marine Patrol being paid for by the town and its residents, any calls for mutual aid relative to boating accidents or incidents would be coming from the town with the city or of Delavan or other departments responding. If the traffic on the lake increases costs for the town, then it's likely increasing costs for us as well through those mutual aid calls. Of course, some of the traffic on the lake comes from users of the town's boat launch. No limits are placed upon daily access numbers through this launch. And based upon average boat launch fees collected of $170,000 per year for the past few years, this could represent anything from 673 to 20,000 passes sold per year, and from 3 to 84 boats launched on any day the launch is open. Without specific information regarding the types of passes sold, one can only speculate based off averages. There was an idea that was mentioned that it would be nice for the city to give a presentation to the Lake Committee and the town board regarding any TIDs that impact the lake or watershed or benefit due to proximity to the lake. As part of that presentation, there would also be a discussion as to the impact on town resources such as police, marine patrols, EMS, fire, mutual aid, etc. This stream of thought ended with another assertion, again lacking any data, that TID number 6 will have an impact on the town taxpayers as well as the health of the lake and watershed. Mutual aid for police, fire, EMS, etc. goes both ways. The town assists the city and the city assists the town. That is what neighbors do, and we do it without any expectation of or mechanism to recover cost. The city only controls approximately 10% of the available shoreline on Delavan Lake, so I fail to see how the city has greater impact on the lake and town resources than the town itself. Last year, the city requested documentation showing how and on what projects money voluntarily given by the city for the betterment of Delavan Lake has been spent. The town was unable to provide invoices or a paper trail to definitively tell us how the money was used. Apparently, accountability is only expected one way. There is a concern that the Shodine land is adjacent to the boundary of the proposed TID number 6 along County Highway F, and that the TID could be amended to annex and include TID number 6. It has been said that this could lead to the city taking control of a portion of the inlet, changing the planned development there, and taking away any say that the county would have over the development. This is punctuated by a comment that the city is supportive of helping developers and giving incentives through TIDs, which is a position that the town does not tend to support. The city currently has a temporary boundary agreement with the town that establishes that our easternmost boundary would be County Highway F. Once the city presents a proposed permanent boundary agreement, the town would benefit from approving it, as it will firmly establish County Highway F as a line that we will not cross, which would keep the Shodine development firmly within the town. As for TIDs tending to offer incentives for development, that is one of the primary purposes of TIDs, and that development would not happen within the 10 boundaries, but for the presence of TID. Wasn't that the reason the town attempted to approve a TID for the Shodine development last year? I'm not really certain, as the city had no interest in attempting to dictate to the town how it develops within its boundaries, and I did not have any comments to make about the proposed TID. That being said, considering Shodine has attempted on several occasions to have the city extend water utilities for development of that land, the city could have done so and had it annexed years ago. We have no current interest in annexing that land or in taking access and control of the inlet. Other comments have been made that accuse the city of reaping the benefits of the lake through increases in property taxes and room tax revenues. And the town doesn't benefit from the lake as well. From 2018 through 2021, the town of Delavan saw an increase in its equalized value of approximately $201 million, while the city of Delavan saw an increase in its equalized value of $155.9 million. The town of Delavan over the same 4-year period saw an increase in its room tax collections of $135,006, while the city saw an increase in its room tax collections of $29,404. So who really benefits more from Delavan Lake? The city is not opposed to being an active partner in maintenance and preservation of the lake and watershed, but we do expect to know where and how our funds are being spent. Also, we are not the only community that impacts the watershed. We are reluctant to allocate annual funds if we are the only other community that does so. A future intergovernmental agreement between the town and city should address lake maintenance contributions by the city, library support contributions by the town, and reciprocal access to parks, facilities, and recreational programs by citizens of both the city and town at resident rates. Finally, I understand it's been said that the Native American community has expressed concerns about burial mounds and artifacts during excavation and construction and asked what the city is doing to protect and preserve the mounds and artifacts. The State Historical Society weighed in upon these issues in 2009 for those on the Lake Lawn property. Any areas there to be protected have been delineated and can't be excavated, moved, or otherwise disturbed. In 2019 or 2020, the developers for the Harbor Club completed an archaeological study on their proposed site as part of their approval process with the state, and nothing of significance was found. Neither Lake Lawn nor the existing Harbor Club site are located within the boundaries of this newly proposed TID 6. It can be assumed that a similar archaeological study will be required for parcel number 24 if this was not included in any previous studies. Thank you for your time. I hope that I've addressed those concerns.
Thank you, Brian. I assume, obviously, that for those on the committee here and anyone that wishes to get a copy of your memo and what you just read off. Any other staff want to chime in at this time, Todd?
Sure, I know this is going on a while, so I'll be brief, but I've got a quick slide deck. So there was a project plan that was distributed. I'm going to hit some of the high points of that before comments are taken.
There it is. That's a good sign. It's doing exactly what it did the other day. Excuse me one moment. I adjusted another setting. Yeah, the last time we tried to do this, well, it's supposed to duplicate it. Okay, it did. Never mind. I just lost out of the screen up there.
Ready? Okay. Next. So just a quick overview if you're not familiar with TIF. TIF is a mechanism, it's a financial mechanism. So this does not approve land uses, development projects, or any of the intended costs therein. Rather, it's a framework. But it's a delineated geographical area. We'll see the map in a moment. And as of the date of TID creation, which in this case on the present timeline for valuation purposes would be January 1st, 2022, all value that is within that boundary becomes frozen and is known as the base value. Anything that happens prospectively, either increases or decreases in value, is referred to as the incremental value. The distinction is property taxes collected on the base, so what's there now, continue to flow to the various taxing jurisdictions, whereas any taxes collected prospectively on that increased value flow 100% into the special revenue fund for the tax increment district and are used to pay for its project costs. Next. So these are the boundaries. So again, the lake on the far bottom of the map, you can see I-43 going through the color coding, which is a little bit difficult to see on this map, but more clear on the project plan. The lighter parcels are parcels that are not presently in a tax increment district. Those that are the slightly darker green, which is the majority, are presently located within TID number 4. So what happens in that case is those parcels will remain in TID 4, but whatever value again was there of the first of this year, those incremental taxes will be collected by TID 4. Anything that happens going forward on those parcels will receive the incremental taxes into TID 5. So you, in those overlay parcels, you'll have base value, you'll have the value that's in TID number 4, and then you'll have the value that's in TID number 5 all stacked on top of each other. So again, TID 4 parcels remain in TID 4, but anything that happens prospectively is to the benefit or detriment of TID number 5. So this is what we refer to as a mixed use district. The statutory requirement is that at least 50% of the area within the district is suitable for mixed use development, which is defined as commercial, industrial, and or residential. Further restriction that no more than 35% of the land area can be devoted to newly platted residential. This type of district has a maximum life of 20 years, and the intent is to provide funding for development incentives as well as public infrastructure improvements to allow development to occur within this general area. And here's a little more detailed map with that breakdown. So in this case, about 96% of the land is suitable for mixed-use development. The 4% or so that is not are city-owned outlots. I think those are stormwater management devices. But if you look at the breakdown on the top, it's about 41% or so each for commercial and industrial, and then about 13, close to 14% for newly platted residential. Again, that's the portion that is limited to 35%, so well under that total. For purposes of the projections, what we assumed is that the entire area will be built out. Now, realistically, that probably isn't going to happen. Some areas may develop sooner, some may develop later, some may not develop at all within that 20-year horizon. So the intention here is to create this mechanism to allow for growth with any of the areas included in the district. So we've assumed that every commercial acre, once developed, will have 350,000 value on average, industrial 400,000 per acre, and residential 1,480,000 per acre. And again, we're assuming the entire area is built out for projection purposes only, roughly 700 acres. So as a practical matter, the way that the plan should be implemented is that costs are incurred only as development projects come forward and are ready to move forward, so that you're incurring the expenditures in tandem with the development that will generate the revenue to pay those costs. And again, using those same average values per acre, a full development scenario, we show it built out by the year 2038, all total about 373.7 million in potential development value. And you can see the further breakdowns between the commercial, the industrial, and the residential. In terms of the cost, the plan has a total of up to 68.5 million. The public infrastructure is the largest component at 51.3 million. Of that, 16.4 million is intended to be paid for by developers. So the developer comes forward, they're required to put in the public infrastructure, they can get reimbursed via pay-as-you-go, or in other words, as they pay the taxes, a portion of those taxes are turned back to the developer to reimburse them for that cost. The balance would be paid for either by cities borrowing.
Does that mean that it reduces in that short period of time the TIF revenue?
The TID receives it and it turns around and it pays it back as an incentive to the developer. It would be whatever the development agreement specified. It could be 100%, it could be 50%. The 34.8 million that's funded by the city, a couple notes on that. The way we structured the plan, there's a couple initial projects in the early years where we show a city bond financing of about 4.6 million. The rest of that is intended to be paid from cash as it's generated. And one thing that makes that 34.8 million number so large is there's a $20.5 million placeholder in there for I-43 interchange related costs. So that's, the lion's share of that total number. If you were to take that out, what we're really talking about is the streets, the utilities, and other needed improvements within this general area. Also, there's up to $14 million for potential development incentives for other than public infrastructure. So this would be a case where a developer approached the city. Again, there'd have to be a development agreement approved by the council, where the city would agree to, again, on a pay-as-you-go basis, use some percentage of that tax increment to fund private development costs. That city borrowing would have an estimated $2.4 million in interest expense, and then we also have $750,000 in administrative expenses for costs the city will incur over the life of the district to manage it. When we roll that up into the cash flow, this is a sort of an abridged version of the larger cash flow in the project plan. We've got the total revenues on the left-hand side, about 121 million. We've got about 90 million in expenditures. And that yellow bar indicates that, again, based on this full development scenario, assuming all the project costs were incurred, that we would be able to close that district in the year 2040 or in 17 of its maximum 20 years. And again, what will actually happen will be dictated by the pace of development. Obviously, if you have smaller scale, smaller expenditures, perhaps the TIG closes sooner. If you were to indeed experience a full development scenario, this would be an approximation of what that cash flow could look like. And lastly, with respect to the schedule, we discussed that already. This slide wasn't updated after the initial JRB, but as was mentioned, that meeting is scheduled for October 17th. With the intention to schedule another joint review board meeting sometime after tonight, but before the end of the month, at which time the JRB will be asked to approve a public member in advance of that October 17th meeting. And I'm happy to address any questions.
Question, you said the light colored part of the map was the only part that's in this TID, which is 23.
Can you go back to that, Brian?
Yeah.
To add on to his question, is it the LeVar farm where Lake Lawn just bought?
So that number 23 is the only part in this TID,
No.
and everything else is from the
So-
previous?
So every parcel that has a number on it, 1 through 24 would be part of this tax increment district. The lighter shaded parcels, so the big one's 23, 1, 2, 3, 4. There might be 1 or 2 more. Those are not presently in TID number 4. So the ones that have the darker coloring, for example, 19, 20, 22, and most of the rest, those are already in TID 4, so they will be overlaid.
That's what I was asking.
Yeah.
So the lighter colored ones are being added to it, the presently existing TID.
No. So we're creating an entirely new tax increment district comprised of the 24 numbered parcels. It happens to be that most of them are already in TID 4. They will stay in TID 4, but as of January 1st, 2022, anything that happens going forward would be picked up in TID 5 instead of 4.
That's what I was asking. And then the other question I have is property, the number 24. The only reason that's in there is because the highway development and the corner. That's what I understood you said.
Well, it hasn't been developed yet,
Yeah,
but that's where they would do their clubhouse, and that would basically, they're gonna be funding the improvement there at the highway.
okay, but it's because it's part of that corner
Right.
development for the highway. Okay.
You're using TID 5, you talk about TID 6.
I'm sorry.
I just want to make the
I
record.
forgot about 5. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I
TID
stand
5 down,
corrected.
TID 5
Right,
down.
yeah.
Just wanna make-
Thank you. Appreciate that clarification. Same concept, just replace 6 with what I said for 5.
So my question is we're mostly just adding this section east of the airport, which is 23, which is Lake Lawn right now. And we're adding 24, which is also Lake Lawn. Am I correct on that assumption?
We're putting all 24 parcels
I
in.
understand that. The other ones are all under TID 4. We're going to add another TID, include those in it, and include this new section, which was not in the TID before, which is 23 and 24.
And a couple others to the left of the map.
Lake Lawns,
is in TID 4.
All of Lake Lawn is at TIF.
24 is already.
Then who owns 23?
It's not, it's owned by a family.
No,
trust.
it's not the resort. Is that what you were asking? It's not Lake Lawn.
It's not owned by the resort.
Right.
Okay, I mean, it's owned by.
It's cool, it's cool. Yeah.
KSP Family
Yeah.
LLC is the owner.
Okay, it's just the shadings on here are like, you said 1 and 2 and 3. That's not, it's hard to tell.
Yeah, the other source of information is there's a list of parcels that's on page 12. There's a column that says overlaps TID 4, and it says yes for the parcels that are in TID 4. So the ones not in TID 4 are 1, 2, 3, 4, 18, and 23.
And then what is the purpose of putting a farm in a TID? I mean, that's what 23 is.
To allow for future development potential. One other thing that is relevant that I didn't mention, I think maybe Brian might have stated this earlier, but TID number 4, the existing district, is past what it's called its expenditure period.
Right.
So we can do nothing further in terms
So
of.
is that gone now?
No, it will remain open for a few more years until it recovers its project costs and then it closes. But nothing additional can be done in TID 4 by way of the city making expenditures. Thus, including all these that were in TID 4. So in a certain sense, it's like a continuation of TID 4 plus adding in those additional parcels.
Kevin?
So, I mean, the inclusion of the TID 4 parcels has to do completely with wanting to maintain them as viable industrial properties where we can provide developers agreements and stuff.
The reason you would put a property like 23 that's farmland is because when the TID is established, it's at that value. And farmland is a lot more value than.
Yeah, I know that.
the
But it's
place.
taxed differently.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
the reason you put something in a TID is because it requires incentive to be developed. It's interesting that the comment made was that the reason you put a farmland into a TID was because it had a low basis. And then you could create a lot of increment. That's not what the purpose of a TID is. The purpose of a TID is to provide for incentives to develop something that wouldn't be developed, but for the incentives provided. So, for example, on the west side of town, you could have put the development that is developed nicely by itself in a TID and gained a lot of increment when those houses, which T trumpets later on in our agenda, are developed. But they didn't require incentive to develop. So the reason you're supposed to put a parcel in a tax increment district isn't because it makes the increment basis low, but because it requires incentive for development.
I have a couple questions. I know I brought this up at the joint review board meeting the other day, but I think it's important for the rest of the commissioners just to hear some of that discussion. That obviously was a public meeting, so anyone could have attended that as well. That just because, and I know some things have been brought up about the project list. Just because we're putting a project list into the TID doesn't necessarily mean, correct, that we will do that project. It just means that we're putting it on. That's one question. I just wondered if you could provide feedback on your thoughts on that.
Right, and that's correct, and that's true with respect to incentives. There's a couple ways you can use TIP, and we've seen it done both ways. One is you create a TIP for every single development project as a site-specific, parcel-specific TIP. Others will use these larger districts like this, and part of the, with respect to the but-for test, we don't know every single thing that's going to happen over the next 20 years in this tax increment district. when it's going to happen, what it's going to look like, what it might need. You know, one of the statements we made in the summary of findings is, to the extent the city considers provision of incentives, it will require the developer to demonstrate the economic needs. City will only provide incentives as needed to allow for a reasonable rate of investment return on the incentivized project. And that's the best practice we would recommend to the city. And we've done that before on projects where we've been retained. I'm forgetting the name of the multifamily project that was completed a couple of years ago with the factory that was converted to multifamily. Yes, thank you. You know, that was one where we actually got the developer's numbers and had folks that work on our side who have background in real estate economics actually look at the pro forma, look at the level of TIF assistance and make a determination whether it's needed, and if so, how much. Can't do that on every single kind of project. It's difficult to do on an industrial expansion, but for things like multifamily, medical office buildings, anything of that nature where it's investment, it's an investment property generating an income to the project owner. You know, there are analytical ways to measure that but for. And so what we would envision is, and this gets back to your point, Mayor, as parties come forward, we want to do this and we want TIF, okay? You know, how much TIF do you want and why? And then you go through that process of vetting each individual project. Same holds true with the various projects. You know, we've got a big a dollar amount placeholder provided by Baxter and Woodman for the I-43 interchange. Will that happen? I don't know. You know, what would the city's exposure to be for potential costs? I think these are all hypotheticals. So these are, you know, truly intended as placeholders at this point.
Just to piggyback on that as well, I mean, I know there's been reference to that meeting and the things in the memo that the county wished or thought or was going to request. One of those requests was $2.7 million be added into the potential project list. And in good faith, that was added in the updated thing, but I just would be interested in your initial thoughts, because some of that would ultimately not be, it may be impacted, but the land and the things that we would be improving aren't necessarily in the city limits. And I just thought,
Excuse me. Did you just say the county highway F project was listed in the project plan?
I said they requested it to be.
It
You
is.
said it was in the most updated.
I
It
think
is.
Is it?
Yes.
So it wasn't in the plan that was provided to us in our packet?
It's not listed as a separate.
If you have the same version I do on page 24, which is the project list, there's a footnote 2.
So,
This would be
right, so,
page 24, footnote 2.
so now the inside public streets and utilities, it's been included.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Good enough?
Yep.
Okay,
Just-
thank you. I was
We're
still
trying to spend
finish.
$100 million. So
Well, I was asking
Little
a question.
scrutiny is
Yeah, and that's why I was asking the question.
That's why I raised my hand. You recognize it.
Well, so anyways, back to my question, and I just wondered if you could provide some thoughts on that or feedback or, again,
So
just because it's listed in the project list,
Right, I mean,
does not mean that it gets done necessarily.
right, I mean, in that specific example, you know, I would expect that the city and the county would have to negotiate and enter into an intergovernmental agreement that would specify the terms and conditions and amounts of any city support for that project. So by putting in the plan, we hold open that possibility, but the plan is not a commitment to the county, nor is it a commitment to anything listed in here. Those are all subject to normal legislative approval processes.
Thank you for providing clarity on the overall project list and that one specifically.
Just a quick question, Mr. Mayor. So I noticed that that was actually listed in the memo as well. So does that mean that the components of the memo are all requests from the county? Or is this something that we missed?
The county has an ordinance. So anytime a TID is created in Walworth County, it requires that through Ms. Connolly, that she goes, or I'm sorry, Ms. Lanzer, she goes through and checks the project plan versus all of the county's ordinance requirements and generates that letter. So we did receive a copy of that letter. That's why we added the footnote. And I don't have a copy of it with me, but there was also some language about the incentives and also some further limitations, and we incorporated that language into the list, the section that has the estimated list of project costs. So I think the city made every effort to honor and respect the request from the county.
Thank you again. Any other questions?
Just one thing, that, in other words, what you're saying is 1, 2, and 3 are included from what came from the county.
I'm not sure 1, 2, and 3 are. So 1 and 2 are. 3 would not be inappropriate in the scope of the legal opinion that's provided for a project plan. The legal opinion that goes in a project plan is as simple as saying that the plan includes all required statutory components. So that's not something that appears in this document.
So 1 and 2 each there are included.
That's correct.
Yes.
Just one clarification. I looked at the parcels numbers and the property owners, and number 24 is actually Delavan Lake Lawn LLC.
Right. I thought you were talking about 23.
No, I was talking 24.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you said 23. 23 is the big.
Yep, I meant 23, sorry.
Any other questions? Any other comments from staff? I would, at this time, invite citizens who wish to speak on this issue to come up to the podium. All I would ask is that you state your name and address for the record, and you can make, Mary, do you want to start us?
Good evening. My name is Mary Nipper. I reside at 2320 Lakeshore Drive, town of Delavan. I'm currently a supervisor with the town of Delavan, and I'm also chair of the Lake Committee. I'm familiar with Matt. He is a voting member of that Lake Committee. I brought some notes with me, a few copies I can leave behind in case I run out of time. My reason for being here this evening is not so much to take a position on TID number 6. My reason for attending is to learn more about TID number 6. I have the most current copy of it and have tried to study it as best I can. I wanted to provide a background for greater collaboration regarding Delavan Lake maintenance, protection, and long-term planning, and both entities for land use within the Delavan Lake watershed. And I see this as an opportunity to share information that could contribute to a stronger collaboration between the city of Delavan and the town of Delavan. I've included in my notes some background about Delavan Lake, but I don't think I have to tell anybody here about the big rehab project and whatnot. The bottom line is that project was completed in '92. At that time, Lake Lawn Resort, at the beginning of that project, was in the town of Delavan. And it was during that window of like 1989 to 1992, I believe, that the city annexed Lake Lawn. And much of that rehab project was funded through the room tax that was coming from Lake Lawn at that time. What's happened is the water quality was almost pristine when that rehab was completed. But within 5 to 7 years, it was very clear from the extensive monitoring that the lake was in another decline again. And it had been ranked as officially eutrophic, which means full of algae, plant nuisance plants, some concerns with the fishery, etc. So since that time, all of our projects have directed at getting that lake back up again. Aggressive monitoring is taking place. And we are probably, I've been told, the most monitored lake in the state of Wisconsin, even more than Geneva Lake. One of the things that has happened is the decline in that lake. In 2018, Delavan Lake was placed by the USCPA under the Clean Water Act on the impaired waters list. Nobody wants to be on that list. It's not a good place to be. So in 2018, we are considered impaired. And a lot of our work going forward now is what we already had planned, but the question of that declining water quality and being on the impaired list. The impaired waters list looks at a number of things. Delavan Lake has 3 of the components that created an impaired waters listing. Our goal now is working with the USGA to get off that list. It is unpleasant to be on that list, but it also affects future sales, real estate, businesses that want to do business on a lake, certainly do not want to be investing their money in an impaired lake. So my reason tonight is to just look at ways in which, even TID number 4, which is one that's underway, we do have concerns with, and we would like to sit at the table to help minimize the impacts on Delavan Lake from TID number 4. TID number 6 doesn't seem at this point, from what I can tell, it has not been built out to be with that residential connection to Delavan Lake, and I don't know if that's what's in TID number 6 eventually. But the fact that it is in our watershed and the activity that takes place on particularly parcel number or area number 23 could have, as developed, an impact on Delavan Lake. And that is a concern for us. One of the things I think of when I think of working with the city or any other group is identifying stakeholders and investors. And the definition of stakeholders is any group, organization that has a mutual interest in protecting any particular program, place, thing. They are stakeholders. The other thing is, who are the investors? You're investing in your future. Delavan Lake has many stakeholders, many investors. Return on investment is important. If you want to bring new businesses to your community, you want to build out and get new revenues, your stakeholders and investors need to have information that says, that's a good way to go. That's where I want to be. Many of you probably remember that in 2005, the Delavan Lake Improvement Association created with the UW Whitewater Department of Fiscal and Economic Studies, a tremendous one-of-a-kind economic impact study about the relationship of a healthy Delavan Lake to the local economy. That's been published and used and presented all over. I think I've presented it at least 20 different counties in the state. But it clearly confirms, and the conclusions are clear, that the relationship is not intuitive, it is real. The health of Delavan Lake is about the health of the regional economy. Last week, I sent, I think it was all the aldermen and the mayor, just the executive summary of that, so you can see those numbers. We're talking 77 million annually coming into this area due to a healthy Delavan Lake. So there are a lot of stakeholders and investors that are interested in those numbers. The only change is that that principle of that relationship never would change. But you know the numbers in that report from 2005, if anything, greatly increased. So I advise you to find a way to spend some time reading that and see those numbers, because that's what the town of Delavan is working on when it thinks about maintaining Delavan Lake. But one of the other questions I have is, What is the outcome regarding TID number 4, the way it's currently being developed, and the potential concerns for Delavan Lake for TID number 6? As I said when I started, I'm not taking a position on TID number 6, but I'm looking at what that growth and expansion of land use could impact Delavan Lake water quality, and how the maintenance and protection programs could be funded within the local stakeholder communities. Another way to measure why expanded collaborations are needed is the increasing use of the lake by visiting and renting boaters, shoreline homeowners, and expanded use of boat moorings at the marinas, including over 200 additional mooring spaces at Lake Lawn that are planned, and newly built residences on the property will have access to the lake. And obviously, those numbers will increase very rapidly. One of the concerns I have more than anything else is Delavan Lake has a commendable safety history. And increasing boat usage, increased conflicts of non versus motorized watercraft, deficiency and knowledge of state and local boating ordinances will most certainly drive the need to increase water patrols. It will drive the need for increased educational programs, therefore more funding support to target safety concerns. More water traffic may well have a negative impact on the safety, ecological, and aquatic balance. Right now, the town of Delavan has one police boat that is manned and operated by the police department, but with a 2,000+ acre lake, you can imagine we're not able to even keep up with the demand that we have now. We will need to provide more equipment and a much larger water safety patrol. Funding for that is unknown at this point. I didn't mention when I stood up that I am also a commissioner with the Southeastern Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission, also known as SEWAPAC. SEWAPAC did a lake management plan for Delavan in 2002. And that now has aged. And we have started work with SEWAPAC on a brand new comprehensive lake management plan. We will see the first of that draft in June of 2023, with an expected publication in 2023, December 2023. One of the things that's included in that study is a carrying capacity. That carrying capacity, and it's well known how to do a template and do a carrying capacity. That will be a target, very important target in that lake management plan. And it could have a resulting impact on the boating capabilities and result in fewer watercraft allowed on the lake during heavy recreational times. So that's an important consideration for us also. So what is needed going forward? For me, my concern is I would like to see us create a model of collaboration that will bring the leaders of each community together. The city of Delavan, town of Delavan, Lake Lawn Resort, residential builders, and their representatives, each sitting at the table at no minimum 2 times per year to share our growth plans, capital investment of plans and services, explore options for joint working groups, and opportunities for funding between stakeholders and investors mentioned earlier. Why would this work, you ask? A plan like this with a collaboration that is clearly an opportunity for both the city and the town of Delavan, it could overcome the political cycles that can obstruct progress, resulting in only short-term gains and goals. It could facilitate more productive and targeted long-range planning on the part of all of the collaborating entities. It would identify common assets and goals and result in options that are linked. It would provide clarity of purpose, more likely to achieve success, and utilize metrics to evaluate results. I am committed to assisting with moving such a stakeholder collaboration forward. This commitment is not related to any future public service positions I may or may not hold. but instead as one who is dedicated to a long-time belief. Good environmental practices are sound economic policy. I thank you very much, and I do have copies of my notes if you should read them. And I must state that what was read by Mr. Wilson, is it, at the beginning, that reaction is not mine. I have a lot of those concerns. But I think it's more productive to find a way to get them on the table. Get them on the table with facts. The people that have the answers, you should find them. You should not rile up the public to something that hasn't happened. So I'm not here for TID 6 to say I have a position on it, but I have an interest. And I also have an interest on TID 4 as it builds out in the future. That does connect to Delavan Lake. I don't know, and I've read the complete plan, revised version I got last week from John Olson, is TID number 6 certainly is in our watershed. And that area number 23 is a concern. So I hope if we can't do it now, we do it very soon and we can address some of these problems together, but it's not working the way it is now. And the funding for 5,000 people in the town of Delavan to keep that lake viable and an asset is a huge undertaking. And we think our stakeholders can help us meet that obligation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Town Supervisor Nipper. I know I had reached out to you personally last
Yes.
week and we had a very nice conversation
Yes, we
prior to
did.
this meeting, and I want to commend you for the approach that you take and during our discussion, but being here tonight, and it's quite different than some of your, or at least one of your colleagues. And that's what I think the reference came from our city administrator. It's, and I quote, not necessarily to encourage all of you to attend and bring your neighbors to the public hearing and make public statements, which is a portion of what Supervisor Galti's email was on August 20th. But I think there's much more collaboration that can be found and working together to address your concerns and concerns of mine as mayor. I not only chair of this committee, but as mayor and the city council and all of us as commissioners on the planning commission. So I commend you for making your comments tonight, and I look forward to finding ways that we can indeed work together. Thank you.
And I would appreciate it if, Mr. Wilson, could we have a copy of that memo and your response to it that you read tonight? Okay, thank you.
Anyone else at this time? Yeah, I again would just ask that you state your name and address for the record.
Happy to. Hi, my name is Glenn Dicko. I'm a resident of the town of Delavan, 2502 Rockford Colony Lane. And I'm also a member of the Lake Committee, recent member in January with Matt, who's also a relatively recent member too. I also want to dovetail a little bit on what Mary said, but really, I guess I did want to come, and I did believe that I had a little bit more to talk about with respect to TID number 6. I guess it was more TID number 4, but TID number 6 does have some elements which are associated and with Lake Lawn property. And it also does, I believe the district does cross over or does have some interaction with the lake. And as a layperson here, I understand that investment in TID districts need to be made within some boundary or some area of that district. And since it overlapped the lake, I thought, hey, that's probably a good reason to come here and just make a statement to you about my desire that the town and the city get into a much more collaborative mode. No disrespect. I think your response was a finger pointing back to a finger that was being pointed at you, and it's a fair reaction. And I think it's good to get your memo too, because it'll help us understand how better to negotiate differences of opinion and get to a place where we have consensus. My overall feeling as a taxpayer, out of the town, be it, but still within the county, and I only live 5 miles away from here, is that we have shared common interests. Our taxes go through the education system. They go to the roads, they go to other areas of the county, which, you know, we share mutual interest in. And I firmly believe that the city knows that the lake is an asset that we both share the benefits of. And it's important for us to work together and collaborate on that. And that it would be no surprise to me if there were concerns on the part of the city as to how further participation, improved or increased participation by the city would actually be used and or dare say it, misused in terms of advancing the needs of the lake. So I really hope that that does happen. I would have to say that based on, I come from a citizen basis, right? So I'm not going to board meetings all the time. I'm not a part of your types of conversations. I'm the guy in the boat with other people. I'm the guy that goes to the cookouts and such and run into my neighbors. And there is misconceptions out there. And the real concern of those folks is this is a treasure. We cannot let this decline. And they see the lake lawn rental boats coming out, and you know, there are safety issues with those. And they see the expanse of the lake lawn property, be it only 10% of the shoreline, it's significant. And they see the difference in the shoreline, you know, horizon now, when it used to be all trees and now it's all, you know, kind of flat. And those spark, you know, expected emotional reactions. And that's not going to end. That's not going to end until things improve in terms of the way the cooperation works between the city and the town. And really, it's not going to end until something starts happening with the lake itself and people start seeing things. So that's on the town, it's on the city. And with that, I just want to thank you for giving me an opportunity to come here tonight and share these thoughts. And I hope that I'll be at a meeting in the not too distant future where it's the city and the town getting together to have that kind of conversation. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other citizens? Yes, Dan. Just again, state your name and address for the record.
Dan Kilkenny, M3616 Elm Ridge Road, Delavan, Wisconsin. I forgot to bring my pencil. I was going to write notes, and so I guess do it the new way, but I accidentally erased everything and it's spell checking the heck out of me. So I may be a little bit chaotic, but I served on the county board for 16 years, and I was actually probably the major push behind the ordinances that prompted Jessica Connolly, the finance director, sending those out, because these TIF districts tend to get rubber stamped without approval, without people really understanding their responsibility. So when I got on the board, I made sure our representative understood her responsibility, and the result of that is what, a 3-4 page memo addressing things protecting the county. Again, TIF district is supposed to be a partnership amongst the school, the city, the county, and Gateway. Gateway's minuscule amount. They really don't have much in the game, but the county and the school district have a large part to do with it. And the other taxing bodies are foregoing their income. And I guess if you've looked in this, there's a section, I haven't seen this at all, but I've reviewed probably 20 of these. There's a section there which indicates over the life of the TID, how much each taxing body is foregoing. Do you know what it is for the school district? There should be a schedule or a page on here.
If fully built out, eventually about $2 million. It's full development.
What page is that on?
35.
The final page. I gave those people.
37, 416, elementary and schools. County of Delavan,
37 million, not 2 million.
Let me get these up. No, it's
Over the life,
taxation.
over the
I'm
life.
sorry.
I was giving you the annual number on the whole building.
so over the life is 37 million.
If, based on the assumptions, the whole building.
Okay,
Our
so,
county 16.354.
okay, so the county would be foregoing 16 million if this did not meet the but-for test. One of the problems I've had with school districts, and the village of Darien recently had a pretty controversial TIF district, is they seem to take the position, well, it doesn't affect us because we levy 20 million, we get 20 million. So whether this is in the TID or not in the TID develops anyway, doesn't impact us. We're limited by the state to something like 8,000, 9,000, 10,000, whatever it is per student. But what they miss is that if this new coal development, for example, for $100 million isn't paying, then Dan Kilkenny is. Everybody else is. The 20 million will just come from a different group. So it's very important to look at this but-for test, see if it's met, if all of your statutory obligations are met. Because if you pass these things, and there was a question about, well, we don't really know what's in the future, so we want this flexibility. I think you have a duty to bring your joint review partners back in to say how you're going to spend the school district taxpayers 37 million. And again, it's, as I say, people tend to rubber stamp these things. There's a blur. What was the amount? 2 million? No, I guess it's 37 million. When I talk to people that are going to be on either the joint review board or the plan commission, I suggest they look at the Department of Revenue's manual, TIF manual, talks about your responsibilities. And it clearly states and anticipates that the plan commission will have additional hearings to get the information that they need. And so things like, is it 2 million, 37 million? Kevin's raised some legal issues. I don't know how to weigh that out. I suppose you might get farther down the road, be in litigation and have this start all over again. But again, if you should be feeling comfortable that you understand all your statutory duties, that you understand all the facts and standards you're making, or the findings you're making. And it's not a finding that, well, Ellers says it's okay. Our city attorney will sign a letter that says it meets statutory requirements, which basically says the right stuff on there, but whether it meets the but-for test, is in the interest of the community, those are things I think you need to look at. We had 2 comments here from people talking about collaboration. If you look at the city of Lake Geneva, I've been opposed a lot to their TIF districts because they don't, I think, make the necessary findings, but the money that they keep basically goes to their marina, their parks. They got parking meters to make more money. It was for the citizens. And to just say, well, we're going to have developer agreements in the future for developers' benefit, you really need to make sure you're making the right findings. Darien, I spoke there, basically said the same thing at their plan commission meeting, and they decided to continue to, number one, address the concerns that the county raised and to get information. The result of that was the TID plan, the developer incentive dropped $10 million, which was for the benefit of the public. They didn't really know it, but that vote they made that day may have been the most important thing they did in their life. Let's see, I don't know, did I erase this again? Yeah, so anyway, I don't know if you've totally reviewed the plan, understand all the components, understand the but-for test, understand that you are the ones that are making the findings to say, yep. And I assume you have a proposed resolution for the plan commission to agree to today. And again, I believe the statutes say you are the ones who are supposed to develop the plan. Now, it doesn't mean you're supposed to get out your pencils, but I think you're supposed to have a real hand in it. And again, some of the questions that were raised by the 2 prior speakers, maybe there's things that could be done for the lake. The thing I'm saying is you don't need to put in everything now that you don't know about. The joint review board meets annually. You can always review that. And when I was on the county board, I was always offended that you don't want to come talk to us. If something is going to make our tax situation better at the county, they would vote for it. The only time they don't or wouldn't is if it doesn't make sense and these findings aren't made. And so you see something like the finance director's memo there, it's pretty thorough. It looks at things, and every time that she's been listened to and cooperated with, there's been changes, more transparency, and a better process. But as you sit here, I guess you got a gun to your head, but it's just, you have to do this now, or, you know, maybe it ends up being next year. That's not your job, your burden to say, well, we can't find a reason why not to. You are supposed to find affirmatively, all those things make sense. And you certainly didn't cause this being put in at the last minute, so I wouldn't feel pressured by that. I don't know what the end result will be, but I do think transparency, deference to your partners would be to make sure that you feel you understand fully your role, that you can make the findings based on this. I don't know what's in your plan indicating the but-for findings, but I know I've looked at a webinar or something that Ellers put out before when they were talking to municipalities in a different function. The but-for test, saying this would not happen but for your incentives, but for this plan, should be reviewed by an independent party to question rates of return, alternative investments, what your possibilities are. And again, I don't know if that's in there. And again, if you feel comfortable, then I guess you could go forward. One final thing, if you do look at the manual that the Department of Revenue puts out, the point it makes, you're making these findings, you should be able to articulate and defend your decision to the public. Why did you vote for this? What were the specific findings? And I guess there's a concern when the school's going to be having a referendum. Again, people get a little mixed up. They think the school district will be able to tax $2 million more per year, or 37 over the course. Yeah, that's not true, but the taxpayers will make up the difference from the others. So when you come to the community and say, we want a $6 million referendum, but we're going to exclude this property, as Mr. Armstrong pointed out, farmland that gets turned into something more. You take farmland at $200 an acre, you do anything with it, you have an increment. School district taxpayers will not be benefiting from that. So again, just like in Darien, a lot of controversy about it. You should be ready to stand to defend and articulate to the public the basis of your findings, because you're the ones that are charged with developing this plan, making the findings, and being able to defend and articulate that it's in the best interest of the taxpayers and the community. And I guess I haven't read it, but usually things that are done quickly with parties that got more lawyers and different aspects and money at stake, it doesn't always turn out well. So again, I've been in situations, served on boards where there is a gun to your head, but again, this isn't your making, and I don't think it's the end of the world to wait. That's the downside. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other citizens wish to speak at this time on this issue? Hearing none, I would then close the public hearing and move on to item number 4.2, which is considering possible action on resolution establishing boundaries of and improving the project plan for tax incremental district number 6. What's the committee's pleasure? I would entertain a motion. For the sake of a motion, I would go ahead and make a motion to adopt the resolution establishing the boundaries of improving the project plan for tax incremental district number 6. a second?
I'll second.
There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
Yes.
Yes, Devin?
So I have a series of questions and amendments. I don't know how you want me to deal.
I guess start with the questions and.
So I have it organized in page order. So for those of you who have your plan.
Do you have a copy of this? That'll save us some time.
No, okay. So, so the first question is on page 16 of our deck. Under key issues, I just want a clarification. Brian, you write TIF expenditures are restricted to projects within the municipality and within 1/2 mile of the district boundary unless separately approved by the Joint Review Board as an intergovernmental agreement. On page 40 of the plan, it identifies pursuant to Wisconsin statute 66-1105 F1N, the city may undertake projects within the territory located within 1/2 mile of the boundary of the district, provided that project area is located within the city's corporate boundaries and the projects are approved by the Joint Review Board. I'm just clarifying, what's the statute reference for unless in your memo? I'm asking the administrator.
I'm still trying to figure out where page 40 is, but it must be the agenda packet, not the plan itself.
Page 40 would be part of the Elder's report.
Right.
Right, but it's not the actual page in the report itself.
Page number based upon what you sent to us. Not that.
Page 18. It's on page 18.
So I gotta write that. They said page 40.
Page 18.
And what's the question?
You said unless, like the Joint Review Board can approve a project within a 1.5 outside of within a 1.5 mile district boundary. If it's not in the city. The statute in page 40 says, with regard to a tax increment district that is located anywhere other than a city, to which subsection 60 applies and subject to subsection 4MD, project cost incurred for territory that is located within 1.5 mile radius of the district boundary and within the city that created the district. I'm just curious where the unless came from.
Well, it still says that here. Unless I'm missing something.
You said unless.
Okay, I didn't say it because I didn't write it.
You didn't write your own memo?
You're talking about the report. the
I'm
project
writing
plan.
about the agenda report. The thing that says unless is from under your name.
Well, yeah, the pages. Okay, well, that's not page 18 or page 40 or whatever it is.
The project plan is correct. So if the Joint Review Board approves a project that is outside of the TID boundaries, it can do so. It must be within the city limits.
Thank you.
And what we do is when we put the project plan together, we enumerate specific projects, but alternatively, you can go back to the JRB on a one-off and ask for permission on a particular
That was the
project.
understanding. That was what the original document said. The thing that changed was the administrator's letter that said unless. which suggested that the joint review board had an approval right outside of the city. Okay. Thank you. I would like to move to page 26 of the agenda packet, which is page 14 of the Ellers report. This is under summary of findings, as required by Wisconsin statute 66-1105.1. That but for the creation of the district, the development project that has occurred as detailed in this plan would not occur in the manner, at the values, or within the timeframe desired by the city. In reaching the determination, the city has considered the substantial investment needed to provide it. So my question is, on that page, who in the city made the but-for determination? Who's made the but-for determination from the city today?
I'm gonna do that on a project by project basis.
So the but-for decision is made by the joint review board. As a best practice, we recommend obviously that at all levels that conclusion is supported. So what this is based on specifically was discussions I had with the former administrator. I think as was noted, we've been working on this
I
for
understand.
lengthy period of time, but the reality is the city, the only other alternative to put in the public infrastructure to allow development to occur would be for the city to borrow for it.
Right.
And the city has limited debt capacity. So in other words, without using the TIF, but for the use of TIF, the city does not have the financial wherewithal to pay for the public infrastructure that would be required.
But isn't the but-for test, but for the TID, the development wouldn't take place?
That's correct.
Okay, so it's not but for the TID, the city couldn't make the public infrastructure development.
I would argue you're saying the same thing.
I'm not.
I disagree.
Okay. Is there documentation?
That's the purpose of the project plan.
So where in the project plan does it demonstrate that the development wouldn't take place?
As I mentioned earlier, the approach the city has taken is to have a larger district. We're not reacting to a development proposal that's in hand where we can evaluate it very specifically and using different sorts of metrics. What we're doing is setting up a framework. This is intended to be a generalized statement and further indicating the city's intent that through the council, when someone comes and says, we need TIF assistance, that would be the standard that the city would apply.
Thank you. Does the city have a worksheet that demonstrates what would happen in this area without the TIF? What would be the pace of development in these boundaries without the TID?
Presumably much slower.
So most of this is an overlay district that for 20 years hasn't been developed.
Portions?
No, most of this district.
Portions of TID 4.
So my point is TIF 4 was going to accelerate development in the time manner that the city wanted, and the development didn't take place. As you point out, one of the reasons why we're including all these parcels is because they weren't developed.
So, but that TID 4 started 3 years before the market crashed in 2008, and everything slowed down in 2008 until pretty recently.
So what have all happened between 2008 and 11? Is that what the TID 4 plan said?
You're asking why it didn't develop? That's
No,
why it
my
didn't
point
develop.
is it didn't develop on the pace.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They don't always
Yeah.
do it when economic factors hit like that. In that case, it didn't.
So My point is, the city hasn't done it by forecast. Let's talk about need for incentives, page 26, which is page 14. To the extent the city considers provision of incentives that require the developer to demonstrate economic, right? I think you've already answered this question, Brian. Are there draft developers agreements for any of the parcels in the proposed TIDs?
No direct development agreements, no.
Okay,
Can I add something? Has anybody approached the city? You don't have to say who they are, about developing any of these properties, yeah, especially 23.
Not since I've been here, but I mean,
Okay,
they
thank
talked
you.
about it before me, so far as 23
No,
is
I was just
concerned.
curious if somebody has approached the city.
Now, the other one, yes. Now, the one that Kevin's referring to, yeah, they did.
I'm not referring to any of them.
Well,
at this
okay,
point.
there is one that was mentioned earlier that has approached us, but we could not offer anything because we had no incentives for it. But the process, we told them that we'd be going through this, and it was basically pretty much a good faith that we would attempt to see what we could do once a TID was established.
Elders,
But it still has to meet the but-for test.
So, sorry, I'm sorry.
Because if we hadn't had at least some of that conversation, they were offered free land in another community and would not have located here and would have left. But they're taking on extra expenses now to build and see what we can do later.
Okay. To me, this should be a separate issue than saying, oh, this another company is gonna build here now and they're gonna have extra. I'm a very pro-business person, I really am. And I think my time on the council has shown that. I have some concerns now over this. Another TID district. I mean, I've approved TID districts before and I've always had a hard time doing it. Because it takes away that tax from the rest of the community. I haven't been shown what the purpose really is of this TID and why it needs to be done now.
Everyone likes to talk about tax being taken away, but there's no increment, there's no development there now, therefore there's no tax shown anyway, except for the base land cost. That's it. So the idea of a TID is that it is going to spur development, and in basically 20 years, we're going to be far better off than we would have been without it.
like a TID 4.
I've already talked about the economy. If you need to refresher, just look up Great Recession.
And the Great Response. And the 2010. What financial analysis has the city seen from developers that demonstrate their rates of return are unsatisfactory without incentives?
Unless something was showed before I got here, nothing that I'm aware of.
Okay,
Because we
there's a
haven't had
great
budget.
Eller's deck that demonstrates the gold standard for identifying what should be contributed in a developer's incentive is looking at the developer's forecasted rate of return, the expected rate of return as common for the industry, and the gap that is justified. So we haven't seen any, so we don't know if there's any gaps.
Because we don't have development. proposals
Right.
yet.
How can you claim that the city will only provide incentives as needed to allow for reasonable rate of return on investment for incentivized project, then include all these projects and guarantee 100% reimbursement for both public infrastructure developer and developers agreement costs?
You would look at each project on its own merits.
There's a total of $33 million, of which there is no evidence that anyone's asked for today, or that there's a gap in their return in this plan. So I would, first action item, amend the plan to require developers agreements for public improvement reimbursements and developer incentives be reviewed and approved by the Plan Commission and the Joint Review Board prior to the city executing the agreement, so verification of appropriateness of the project and meeting the but-for test is confirmed.
There's an amendment. Motion made. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
I have something to add. I would have been perfectly fine with that amendment. Except I'm not in favor of having bureaucracy tied up with sending it to the county.
The joint review board isn't the county. The joint review board actually is the body. that
There's a representative of the
makes-
county on it. It's
There's
not
only
just-
one representative.
I also still don't feel that that's appropriate. If this is something that we're gonna be looking at from a city standpoint, I find it completely appropriate that the planning commission review it, and it goes to the city, and that's it. So I can't be in favor of that particular amendment. With that one piece stripped out, I would be for it.
Well, you're gonna get a no vote from the joint review board.
I wish I had a crystal ball on.
So
One of our commissioners just said we're gonna have no vote because I'm not, I didn't have a crystal ball. But that's unfortunate, especially since we just pointed out earlier this evening that we potentially put a very big request of theirs into the project list, which I actually have questions about. So that said, that was further discussion. There's a motion and yes.
I was just.
The comment was, you're gonna have a no vote from the county.
if the joint review board, and my.
I don't know how you have.
So the amendment
insight into
is.
that.
Oh, I missed that. part.
I'm sorry,
Sorry.
that was
Good
an
clarity.
incorrect statement on my part, sorry.
That was unfortunate, I think. I know there's been a number of discussions.
Did you call any questions?
Well, I'm just gonna further the discussion. There's been a number of communications, I know, between members and the county and representatives. And so, that's insightful.
Could you repeat?
Yeah, is everyone clear on the motion?
The amendment?
Yeah.
Repeat the amendment.
Required developers agreement for public improvement reimbursements and developer incentives be reviewed and approved by the plan commission and the JRB prior to the city executing the agreement. So verification of appropriateness of the project and meeting the but-for test is confirmed.
So you're saying that after we've paid Ellers to go through and calculate the but-for test, you still want us to come back? to the
Excuse me,
plan
Ellers.
No,
commission?
this is further,
Clear, but-
this is further discussion before.
You want us to come back to the JRB and the plan commission instead of just going to the city council, which is the normal process?
I have a real problem with that, both as the chair of this committee and an elected official. Taking, I mean, we see enough of that at the state level, taking away our authority locally to make decisions. There's been a motion and a second. Any other further discussion? If not, all those in favor, well, let's just have a roll call, I guess.
Mr. Cass,
Yes.
Ms. Alder,
No.
Mr. Beazer,
No.
Mr. Whitlock,
Yes,
Mr. Armstrong,
Yes.
Mr. Schrader.
No.
It's a tie.
So the amendment fails to carry.
Yeah.
So, there you go.
Did you have some other questions or amendments? I just will say, I'll wait till you guys are done in
He has me.
collaboration. Sure.
Yes, I do.
Well, I'll just say too, I know you used I think what's important to keep in mind is obviously what's been brought up, but I think you used the example of the good development that we're now seeing on the west side of housing, which is great. But had there been a tax incremental district created many, many years ago, would we have seen that development sooner? Would we have seen families come into our community sooner? Would we have seen potential for other things? And obviously the answer, because there wasn't any incentive to do anything sooner, there hasn't been growth. We've got the numbers that between 2009 and 2019, there was like 28 single-family homes built in the last 2 years. It's been wonderful, and I would attribute it to a number of other policies and things that we offer in the leadership and administration, and just marketing our community and the schools and working in collaboration. You know, collaboration has been the key word tonight, that we're seeing more development now. So I would, you know, it's, you use the example of what the development, I would argue that potentially that development could have been done sooner if there was incentives, and we also talked about that. I think that's important to keep in mind when we're looking at this. I also think we've learned a lot. This is, we're talking about potentially TID number 6. That means this isn't our first rodeo for some of us. And I would say we probably have come a long way since TID number 2, which one of our speakers here tonight benefited, I would say, from. And so I'm sure we've learned a lot since we've come from TID number 2, which was a downtown TID that was closed out. But 4, would that law practice and other things that came about in that TID number 2 come about had it not been for a TID incentive? I don't know. That was before my time, but I think I welcome the questions, the scrutiny. I know a lot of this comes from what happened in Darien and all that good stuff, and we'll continue the process. And I think to have someone stand up and just assume that a developer's agreement is going to benefit the developer is really disingenuous. So that's where I'm at on this, and I think those are things to certainly keep in mind when we're making this decision. So Kevin, you had
So
more
I'm
questions?
on page 29 of the packet, page 17. I have a question. Why is the developed parcel number 18 included in the TID? It's referenced in the administrator's letter as already developed by First Supply.
I'm sorry, Mark.
The parcel number 4 is the First Supply building. They were proposing to eventually build a second building, and that was to make part of a connection at one point. But that 18 would then be their expansion area. The building would actually sit on 2 different parcels.
So, so given that, it's not but for the TID, right? It's but for the triangle is continued before I would expand my building onto it. So I think I would move to amend the TID map to remove parcel number 18.
There's an amendment. Motion made. Is there a second? The amendment dies due to the lack of a second.
Thank you.
Maybe it doesn't.
It's next to Outlook.
It's right by
Outlet
4.
Right by 4.
Outlet 1.
Outlet 1. I think
It's right by number
a
4.
lot.
Okay.
So it's being included because we want to provide an incentive to an existing business that owns a contiguous parcel.
Okay.
That wouldn't develop because obviously their returns on their existing parcel are too low and so need incentive.
And they're already at 4, are they not?
No,
Yes, they are in 4 already.
I'm just,
I thought the motion died for
It
like a
did.
second.
there was,
Yes, Kevin.
why is parcel number 24 included in the TID when the developer identified multiple areas concerning the proposed development plan and precise implementation plan that they did not require any public funds to pay for the public infrastructure or private roads or buildings related to this project. So I'd move to amend TID map to remove parcel number 24.
There's an amendment motion made. Is there a second?
Parcel number 24 is the central drive for the new development that is already underway. And potential community center or conference center, as I understand. Clubhouse, the private clubhouse for those residents. Once again, I move to amend.
Yep.
TID
There's an
14.
amendment motion made. Okay. Is there a second? Yeah. Want some more clarity?
Yeah, is it common to build a completely private building in a TID like that?
Well, all of them are private, otherwise it wouldn't be taxed.
I understand that. I'm just asking a question.
The issue with the project is number 16 is a public improvement because it's an intersection, it's a light at that intersection.
Correct, but what I'm asking is 24 itself is actually in the TID itself, and it's a completely private clubhouse. So if somebody, normally,
And a private road.
right, normally, these types of situations, it's for public, it's their businesses, so they're public, the public can go in and out of them. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Right, but we're not paying for the clubhouse or the road, we're paying for basically a light there that will help to, between those two entrances, one at Lakeland and one there, it'll make it safer for traffic coming in and out of the two developments.
I'm not debating that we need traffic lights, I know that. What I'm saying is this private entity, this is completely private. It's like building a private subdivision.
Right.
Okay, and, okay, we will use some tax dollars to make that private subdivision better for you.
They're going to fund the light and then
Then
the
why do we
increment is being generated. This is just, the whole TID will be generating increments.
I understand,
And
I'm
it'll
just
be
asking
repaying for that, it'll be
questions.
repaying for that. So I mean, if you cut it out, it just means we won't capture the value out of that for this TID. It's still gonna generate taxes regardless.
What kind of taxes do you get on a road and a clubhouse that's private?
Just as much as you would on any other improvements on private property.
It's specified in here. Mr. Chair, there's no second.
I did ask if there was a second. Oh, Steve, oh, sorry.
So did it die because of?
I guess, yeah, that's. Okay.
Has there been development plan discussions concerning the residential and mixed use plans for parcel number 23? Is there a draft plan for development?
Mark? Sure.
About 3 years ago, there was a concept plan put together, but that's as far as it ever went.
There's no proposed developers agreement there, right?
There is not.
And the city has not seen financial projections for the proposed development which demonstrate the but for city incentives, the project would not move forward. So the city,
Yeah, I can't hear what you.
I said-
think, no, you're fine.
has the city seen financial projections for the proposed development which demonstrate that but for city incentives, the project would not move forward? And Mark said no. Has the city considered adding the parcel in the future by amendment to the TID when these steps have taken place?
Todd, what is the cost each time we amend the TID? You told me this before.
About 15 grand.
Yeah.
Okay, so for 15 grand, we want to include it now, include all the costs now, just for housekeeping. We don't know whether or not it requires incentives. We don't know if there's a development plan for it.
Well, once they have a development plan, then we'll be able to do the but-for test and see whether or not it needs. incentive.
We have 4 bites at the apple to provide amendments to the boundaries of a tax increment district by statute.
With an increased cost every year.
15 grand.
I mean, I think you can make the argument with respect to virtually all these parcels. The alternative is you create a TID for every development project that comes in. That's what some communities do.
I would move to amend the TID map to remove parcel number 23.
There's an amendment motion. Is there a second? Motion dies due to lack of a second.
Okay, thank you. Which parcel on the map contains the Millennium Facility presently under construction?
That would be 10.
10. As noted in the previously, that project's already underway. What's the city's justification that the but-for assurances that TID 6 would be formed and dollars that had not been approved by the Plan Commission, Joint Review Board, or the Department of Revenue would be provided that that development would take place?
Stab at how this would fit but-for.
I think it was the comments you made just a few minutes ago, Brian, in that I know there was meetings with this developer and representations that TID assistance could be considered, and they proceeded in good faith with that understanding.
Has there been a legal opinion completed by the city's council that says that this decision meets the but-for because it's in substantial compliance 2 years earlier of the formation of the TID?
I have not drafted a legal opinion on that issue.
I think we were looking at that prior to the next joint review board.
Correct. My next question concerning the boundaries. Have there been conversations with the owner of the private airstrip parcels 22 and 17 concerning future plans for the existing facility beyond the use as an private airstrip? No?
As far as I know, it would remain an airstrip. They were talking about some possible improvements there on it.
Given 2 years ago, efforts by the city to seek support for modernization or expansion of the airstrip with federal and state officials failed to demonstrate broader government support. What gives the city indications that these parcels will be used as a more extensive public facility?
Isn't it fair to say that if there was projects that came about and developers agreements made, that those kinds of discussions could potentially be made on or answered? Your question answered on what kind of.
So as of this day,
No.
right? Has there been analyses completed to demonstrate economic need for the development of the facility that produce positive public results to the city?
Just talking about the airstrip.
The private airstrip.
The only thing I know about is they need to repair it.
Right.
I would just say historically, and this goes back many years ago when I worked at Stock Lumber for 11 years and it was private, the Stock Lumber was privately owned by the Casey family out of that Green Bay. I know he used that when it was in much better repair, in late 90s. I believe strongly, knowing that he flew in and checked on his that was more of an incentive. I know in years there's been talk about other owners of Lake Lawn tearing up the airstrip completely and developing it with houses. I have always fought hard to keep it an airstrip, and I think there is I have no data to say that it definitely, but I think if there's more of an incentive potentially with industrial manufacturing because we've seen it historically and potentially in the future, it could be with an airstrip better maintained than
Well,
it currently is. That's just my personal.
I mean, I
opinion.
remember as a member of the plan commission, the owner has made private investments in the facility for their own personal. Right? So I would move to amend the TIDMET to remove parcels number 22 and 17, because I don't see any public purpose being served by the TID expended funds.
There's an amendment motion made. Is there a second?
Is it already part of 4? I have a hard time seeing what's 4 and what's 6.
No, 22.
Not 4, I meant 5.
It's already in full.
It is in full.
So it already is in 1. It's in 4, I'm sorry. It's just, it's really hard for me to.
Yeah, it's all right.
I can't tell the difference.
Mr. Mayor, could I ask a
Yes.
question? Is Highway 50 based on this drawing in the TID?
The tax increment district is comprised only of whole parcels of real property. So
But yet the
any,
line goes on the
right,
opposite side of Highway 50.
and that's really immaterial.
Okay.
Right away is not considered to be part of the TID.
Okay, thank you.
There was an amendment made, motion made. Is there a second?
Next item, so
I guess died due to a lack of.
So, the next item I would like clarification is there a reference in the plan, because I couldn't clearly see it, that the city can transfer funds on the project cost list to other purposes without an amendment and approval of the joint review board
Page 23
of the plan?
of the plan,
So that would be-
section 8. It's the first bulleted paragraph.
What's the subject head?
Detailed list of estimated project costs.
Section 8 on top. Section 8.
So do I read that correctly, that funds cannot be transferred from one item to another
They can to the extent that it's no more than 15%.
of any single line item? So you could transfer from a noted line item to another noted line item.
Correct.
Is that the way you read it?
That's the intent.
Thank you.
That was put in at the county's
Right.
request.
So, on page 46 of our agenda item, which is the page 24, the estimated project cost list. Can you explain the non-project costs and detail on each item?
I can't tell you what all of those figures are exactly. That came from the list that was provided by Baxter and Woodman. But the intention is that they are either funds that are coming from another non-TID source to reduce the total project cost. For example, could be a grant, or they're costs that are determined not to be of benefit to the TID area. So they're prorated out.
And so what's the source of those funds if the city approved these plans? That's not your question. We don't know. So there's a total of $11,156,000 of non-project costs that city officials can't tell us what the source of those funds are.
Mr. Mayor, Marquez.
Oh,
It's okay.
I'm looking look at the
It,
project.
it could be a combination of developers, what's the word I'm looking for, contributions.
No, the developer's contributions
That's
are
four.
identified elsewhere.
Okay, then it's in the capital fund.
So the $1.156 million in this plan from these non-project costs are non-TID capital project costs in your mind that the city would own. Okay, so this base approval of this plan, right, of estimated total project cost of $68.5 million on that page, actually means that we're committing city taxpayers to capital expenditures for full execution of the plan of another $11,156,000. Is that
This,
correct?
this plan doesn't commit 1 cent.
No. I mean, but plans, once they're adopted, tend to create inertia. Someone says, oh, we approved the airport improvement, the State Highway 50 underpass. And it's in the district plan. And that's used as justification oftentimes in other bodies. That's my point.
Mark, the 70% of that total is on the I-43 interchange.
Correct.
Is that like DOT money or?
It could be, but it's primarily because half the interchange is not located within the district.
Okay.
So. Thank you.
Yes.
I want to make a motion to remove item 1A, $355,000 as eligible for reimbursement through developer reimbursement of public costs. For 2 reasons. The developer has not indicated a need for the funds to complete the development. There's no developer's agreement in place. The city has paid, we should remember, for relocating that entrance through TIF 4 20 years ago to what we refer around here for people who have memories as the boulevard to nowhere. So as you know, if I could just take a second, the estimated project costs are $355,000. It says it's going to be funded by the developer. And in fact, we're going to reimburse the public improvement costs by the developer. I'm not asking that the intersection not be built. My amendment says that it's not eligible for reimbursement through developer reimbursement of public costs. So it would reduce public improvement costs paid by developer by $355,000. That's my amendment.
There's a motion, there's an amendment motion made. Is there a second? Motion dies due to lack of a second.
You know, tell those kids.
I think what I would say is that just because it wasn't taken out, we're gonna review all this, to stand up here or sit up here and just make all these comments, because I said it already, very disingenuous. We've come a long ways. There's different people in place. There's different elected officials that serve on the council. To just assume that because it's in there, that we're just gonna write out a blank check and not ask any questions, I don't appreciate it. I personally, I don't. 'Cause I think we learned.
I'm sorry that
But I'm just saying, I think what you're getting at is all of this, I think you're about to make comments that, oh, you actually did make a comment, something about the school kids or something.
But I would point out that under statute 66-11054, one of the responsibilities of this body is to prepare, not just adopt, but prepare the proposed project plan. I point out, Mr. Mayor, that this project plan appears before this body, who is responsible for preparing it, the first time tonight.
Right. And
And
I
you're
would say,
asking-
you're out of order. I'm running this comment.
That's enough. Act like a gentleman, act like a professional. That's enough. You're yelling at the chairman. That's enough.
He
Let
raised
him-
his-
I raised my voice after you just raised yours to me. What I'm saying is, I think it's very disingenuous to say that we haven't learned from some of the 5 previous TIDs that have been created in the city. A lot of 3 of which none of us, I don't think were ever involved in any way, shape, or form. I would venture to guess, we've spent more, which is, I think, a really good thing. That's what I was gonna say at the very end. We've spent a lot of time, we're gonna continue to spend some more time than probably more than any other district has been potentially scrutinized, and I think that's a good thing. So just to act like we're just gaveling in and gaveling out, and there's no, that whatever we approve tonight is a blank check for the future. I think you're better than that. I think you know better than that. Go ahead.
I move to amend, removing item 1B, $355,000 that's eligible for reimbursement through developer reimbursement of public costs. 2 reasons.
Didn't we just have that? That was the
No,
same
1B.
number. Oh, sorry.
The developer has begun the project, indicating he's not requesting these funds, or the project isn't pending, but for. And the developer assured the planning commission that no governmental funds were required.
There's an amendment motion made. Is there a second? The dies due to lack of a second.
I would move on to, if I'm recognized,
Yep.
item number 3, State Highway 50 underpass. There's a proposed underpass of which I've not seen a project plan for $2.75 million, of which $916,000, according to the Public Works Director, may be coming from capital funds of the city, of which are going to be reimbursed $1.8 million to the developer for an underpass to join 2 parcels owned by related parties for no public use, from the resort to the proposed residential area. I'd move to amend to remove developer item number 3, as it's not a public improvement, provide access only from one private parcel to another.
There's an amendment motion made. Is there a second? Motion dies due to a lack of a second.
I'd move to amend by striking item 4, airport improvements, as it's not a public improvement and benefits the private airstrip owner.
I'll second that one.
There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
I have a couple questions regarding that. Just because it's a private airport doesn't necessarily mean that they've made restrictions that it cannot be used for public use. There could be a fee assessed, there could be a number of ways that the public could benefit from that. So I'm not sure that that necessarily benefits the city by removing that. I think that by having access for a private airport to allow people to fly in, they will be bringing in revenue streams monetarily. They will be using this as an access point where they can come into the city, and there is a lot of ways that the city can benefit from increased revenue from an active airport. An active airport in an area, that's a huge piece of infrastructure. And I'm sure that we can come up with a way to help partner with this particular entity, because we've got a great partnership with them ongoing. So I'm not sure that removing that is necessarily in the best interest of the city.
Any other discussion? There is a motion and a second. Is everyone clear on the amendment? May we have a roll call?
Ms. Alder,
just, now that you asked for, apologize, clarification, a yes is in favor of the motion to remove it?
Yes.
Correct, so no.
Mr. Beazer,
No.
Mr. Lindblom,
I'm gonna vote no.
Mr. Armstrong.
Yes.
Mr. Cass,
No.
Mr. Schrader.
No. Motion fails. Five. Kevin?
I'd move to amend by striking item, no, I'd move to amend, striking item number 10, the I-43 interchange. We don't have any work demonstrated yet. There's no indication, state or federal approval. And I point out that a large portion of the costs are outside of the city's borders, which aren't provided to be allowed in the district. So you got a project that's in this plan that requires, as Mark points out, $8.8 million at least outside the city's borders. Can't be completed inside the plan.
Just a quick point of information. Wasn't there an avenue that allowed for construction outside of the boundaries?
If it's annexed into the city,
If it's
it's
annexed.
gotta be in the cities.
So as long as it's, and this would be outside of the city limit. The construction part of it would be outside of the city limit entirely.
If it were constructed as a diamond interchange, yes.
Which is the only way.
It's part of the boundary.
The best way that fits.
But
That property part of the boundary.
by that definition, that means that we could not in fact construct it because it is outside of that district.
Right.
But that doesn't change the costs that are in place with putting one that is on our side, correct?
This would only be able to be used with our portion of the on and off ramps. The other portion would have to come from somewhere else.
If it was a diamond,
The funding, yes.
if it was not a
Yeah, I just
diamond, it was on
wanted to
one
clarify that.
side, still within there, then we could still use the funds to, okay, all right, thank you.
We'll just have to come somewhere else to get another.
There's not a second, but
Yeah.
I was curious, because I was waiting, and that's why I threw in my point of information. Thank you.
There is an amendment motion made. Is there a second? Motion dies due to a lack of a second.
Mr. Chair, my last question
Yes.
is on, is asking about the legal opinion.
Yes.
Is it presumed that the board would act without the legal opinion, the plan commission? Because it's not attached and there isn't one, right?
I have not drafted a formal opinion at this point in time.
And just for clarity, the formal opinion is on specifically.
I need to review the plan and that it complies with 66.1105, so force of that.
So,
And again, which was raised earlier, that will be done before board of review, joint.
so I'll try one more time. I would move to table.
There's already been a motion and I wanted some more further discussion before we move.
I would, I would move to table consideration to the October 3rd Plan Commission meeting, at which point the legal opinion could be brought before this Plan Commission.
I could have it done before that. I could have it done for the September 20th. Joint meeting.
Would you like to amend? your-
I would move to amend the consideration or the approval of this motion until a date certain. September 20th, Steve?
Yes, sir.
There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion on that?
I think it's appropriate that we have all the information.
I have no problem with, having that, as long as we can have it before the September 20th meeting, the other discussion I was gonna say is that, 'cause I think it's been brought up a few different times, specifically with one business, in particular. I actually heard through the grapevine that there's another long-standing business in the city of Delavan that has not reached out to me and that I know of anyone in the city. I just heard it indirectly, so, that they've outgrown their space. I think I've often heard that manufacturing is
Mr.
died.
Chairman,
I'm just,
Did we, is this?
this is part of the discussion.
Oh, this is germane to the.
Yes,
table
it
motion.
is. Yeah, if you wanna
I'm just.
appeal the
curious.
chair to
I'm
see if
just
it's
curious.
germane or not, we can have that roll call vote too, I guess.
Just curious.
Okay, I've given you a lot of, time to talk. I think it'd be respectful that I at least finish my comments. Is that okay?
I don't think a motion to table is debatable.
It is not.
Well, I'm not debating anything. I was adding for the discussion, but if that's gonna be if you want it, we'll just have the vote. All those in favor of tabling it to September 20th, signify by stating aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign, motion passes.
No, sorry, I'm a no vote.
Oh, sorry, okay. So, motion passes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to 1. Before moving on to the next item, maybe I can be allowed to say what I was saying earlier, which is, I think it is a good thing that we spent a lot of time reviewing and asking questions. I think there's a real case that can be made that this planning commission has spent a lot more time on a proposed TID 6 than some of the districts in the past. So thank you. I appreciate everyone's comments, questions, and the discussion that we had. That said, we'll move on to item number 5.1, public hearing to review and possible recommendation, Keaton Max Patel. 5.1 is a public hearing on a request to consider planned infill development step 4 precise implementation plan PIP at 304 South 7th Street, located in the business local BL zoning district to allow for redevelopment for the future or for the current retail building applicant, Max Patel. At this time, I would go ahead and open the public hearing.
Mr. Mayor, do you still want me here?
I think- No, I think if there's no objection, we can excuse our city council.
I'm happy to stay.
All right, yes, we'll let you start us off.
You want to start off? Okay. Sometimes a public hearing, you have the public first.
Yeah, we have staff usually, but go ahead.
All right. Okay, this project is for the Beverage Center. It's located on Ann Street and South 7. Warren Hanson, representing the owner, Max Patel, and his family. With Ferris Hanson and Associates. I've been doing stuff here for over 40 or 50 years, I think now. It's been a while anyway. What this project was, it started out as a concept plan to build this a number of years ago. And then got put back again, based on the times, you know. And so it came back up, and the Patels had purchased another adjoining lot, a house next door to it. And the plan here is to remove their existing facilities and rebuild it back and take out 2 residences that are properly zoned for the business at this time. And to build this, replace the building back away from the intersection. That would be a big benefit to the city, I'm feeling, in that it'll take the parking out that's now in the public street. And it'll take the corner building out that is right on top of the right of way, even within the right of way, one part of it. And put it back and allow some parking, off-street parking and landscaping and a new structure and vision. This has already went through 2 or 3 concept reviews, and that the general development plan was approved. This is now the precise implementation plan for the final approval. And the reason we did this is there was some things in the project plan that needed a plan development approval rather than just a regular zoning permit. And so those have been addressed and taken care of, and we proceeded in that manner. So we're asking for the approval at this time of the project. And this is the project here. I just colored it up a little bit. The green you see is, of course, lawn areas and the green space. And the building is back here. This is the parking area in the front, lighter color is the parking area. This is the corner of the street. Right now, the existing building is where my hand is. Existing parking is where my hand is here in the street, and then the street here. So all of that's going to be removed. This would also be done in phases. Obviously, he'd like to stay open as long as he can. So we get our initial permits. We would remove houses. That was another discussion about this house. If somebody wants to move that house, he's all for it, but he doesn't have any money to move it. He would be tearing it down. So
How many houses?
there's 2 houses, there's one here
Right,
and there's one here.
okay, that's what I thought. I'm trying to get a better look at all this.
On that point, if I may, there seemed to have been some initial interest that at least the city had heard, because I've been pretty consistent about trying to.
The city had a lot.
Yeah, so I don't know, are you aware of any more
No,
concrete?
no, I'm aware of nothing outside of, I told the owners about it, and they said, well, if somebody wants to do that, they would work with them to do that. But he doesn't have the financing to do it,
Sure,
or the,
well,
or the lot to put it on either. so.
right. I just knew that there was a couple of people that I had heard through city staff. that were
If the
interested.
city knows of something, he'd be listening, wanting to listen to or something, but.
I'm personally excited that there's gonna be more parking, because anytime I have to drive by there, it's a scary
It's very-
situation with people
yeah.
backing out on the road and everything. This is gonna be great.
Question is you're turning the building away from the main street
Yeah, it's gonna
Or-
more or less face the corner.
corner.
It's not
Okay.
gonna be facing either street
Okay.
per se. And it won't even look like it's completely on the street, because we're gonna have landscaping and other things in front here.
And right now, the building is practically where your corner
Yeah,
thing is.
it's right here.
It's on the street.
Yeah,
okay.
And it faces 7th Street.
Right, and we would maintain that building until the houses were done, and we were starting to we could probably even get some foundations in back here while he's still doing business, but then he'd have to take it down and finish.
I like the way it looks.
Any questions? Yes. Staff just
Jump in.
chime in a
A
little
few
bit here.
comments about the procedure. Good evening. I think Mr. Hanson explained the project very well. I just wanted to clarify the procedure and the steps that were in here. So at your August meeting, you approved the general development plan. So that really established the use, the parking, the setbacks. And as Mr. Hanson mentioned, you did approve reduced setbacks in a number of different locations, which we determined was necessary to kind of fit the new redeveloped business on that tight lot. As part of the PIP approval, which is before all of you tonight, this is when we would review site plan details, including building exterior, building materials, landscaping, lighting plan. And so as I'm sure many of you know, we do this in separate steps because it makes it easier for everyone to review and also saves the applicant time and money in that they can kind of get their zoning straightened out first before they invest in architecture, or excuse me, architects or landscape architects and other kind of those final steps, which can be quite costly if you don't know that your project is sanctioned or approved by the city. So in addition to the flexibilities that were granted at the GDP step, this project would also need 2 other points of flexibility as part of the PIP stuff. The reason for that being is that this project is the underlying zoning district would be BL or business local, and it's adjacent to property that's zoned single family. And the zoning code would require what we would call a buffer yard along that zoning district boundary, basically to establish kind of a buffer between more active and intense commercial use next to residential use. Because of the kind of tightly developed nature of this site, there's not a lot of room for what the code would normally require as a full buffer yard. Usually a buffer yard would be a combination of a width, so physical width, distance between the two properties, number of plantings, and then often can include screening such as a fence or arborvitae. This site plan doesn't quite propose a large enough buffer yard that we would typically like to see in this situation, but I think we all recognize that it is a pretty tight site. And the applicant has proposed a fence in that location with some landscaping. And so my recommendation is to approve the proposed PIP, but grant them flexibility to have a reduced buffer yard. So less narrow than we would normally want to see, or excuse me, less wide than we normally want to see, and reduced number of plants just because the space is not available in that location. In addition to the flexibility, I've also suggested a number of conditions of approval in my staff report, specifically calling out that the buffer yard that is proposed must be maintained, or if anything changes to it, they should at the very least add more plantings and fencing rather than take away, because that will be important for the neighboring property. And then lastly, it's kind of a minor thing, but when they submitted their lighting plan, they were showing some light trespass on the south side of the property. The zoning ordinance currently caps light trespasses a half-a-foot candle at the property line. Basically, the idea is you're not shining lights in your neighbor's windows or onto their property. So my suggestion for that is just to provide a shielded light fixture and point that fixture away from the neighboring property, so to minimize that potential impact on that property. I think that I covered everything that I wanted to cover, but I'm here if there are any other questions.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
is the next door neighbor that's going to live next to this property aware? Yes, are they aware of the distance and how close it is? I mean, were they made aware of what's happening?
Not to my knowledge that they were, but we do have the lighting shielded down to a half-a-foot candle there, so there's not overflow on that one. And the other property to the south, that's a business and a parking lot.
I just
And the only
wondered,
lighting we put in there was just enough for exiting lighting.
no, I just wondered if the neighbor that's living next to this in a house is aware of this building project. That's all I want to know.
Not to my knowledge, although it's
Isn't
been
that
advertised,
normally
has come to many
part of
meetings.
this? Should they be made aware?
I think it's not the letter telling them, oh,
Did they get a
The
letter?
public hearing.
yeah, it's public hearing, so they get
That's
it
all I
notice
wanted
in
to
the mail,
know.
right?
Correct.
We are putting a fence there,
Okay.
you know.
I asked the petitioner this question, I'd ask our staff, you or if any other staff want to chime in. I know there was some early interest, I just wondered if on the two homes in question and the potential to maybe move those and work with the city on perhaps a city-owned lot. Have we had any more updates on it? Are those, I mean, just people,
Just two different people.
okay, I mean, anything at this point that's real, so just asking questions. Okay. That's the only question I have. Any other questions for staff? Otherwise, thank you. Any other citizens in attendance at this time wish to speak on this issue? Seeing none, with that, I would close the public hearing and move on to item number 5.2, which is request to consider planned infill development step 4, precise implementation plan PIP at 304 South 7th Street, located in the business local BL zoning district, to allow for redevelopment for the current retail building applicant, Kitana Max Patel. Pleasure.
I'll make that motion as stated, and then all of the staff requests.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor of the motion signify by stating aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Thank you. Item number 6 is public hearing to review and possible recommendation, Falcon Ridge Apartments. 6.1 is a public hearing on the request to consider planned infill development, step 4, precise implementation plan PIP at 615 Farrell Avenue, located in the business OEL and residential multifamily 12 RM12 zoning districts to allow for a group development residential apartment complex in the area north of Delavan Fest Park, applicant Falcon Ridge Apartments. At this time, I would go ahead and open the public hearing.
Okay, so this is another PIP on our agenda, so it's a similar review process as the previous. So again, we're looking at landscaping, lighting, building elevations, and things like that. We have had a few clarifications since the GDP was approved last month. I think they're all good clarifications, but I did want to note them since I'm not sure they were discussed in depth last month. One clarification is that rather than providing a publicly available internal walking trail on the site, I think that was potentially discussed at one time. They'll be providing sidewalks along the public streets. Another clarification was that the dog park, instead of a playground, there would be a small enclosed dog park that would be located on the southeast portion of the site rather than near the stormwater pond, as had been previously discussed. I think this is a better location because it's near the parking for the park and also is away from the stormwater pond in case it's an activity generator for kids or anything like that.
This might have been Ann. I apologize. Since we're there, otherwise I'll forget. I wasn't here last month and I apologize. With that dog park, is that a members of the community there?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because that's something that still needs to get worked out. And so one of my recommendations in speaking with staff would be to have the property owner work out a development agreement with the city to determine how that use would work out, what the hours would be. At the same time, there's also the use of the parking along the south side. And so that, in my opinion, that development agreement could address whether it's an easement or another tool to kind of address how that would work with the city and a public-private partnership. So yes,
Thank you.
hasn't been determined yet.
But to be clear, we're not looking at this as a substitute for the dog park.
No, good. That's what I wanted, basically. Thank you. I would not be.
Pretty small. Additional clarification, since last month, they did add 50 surface parking spaces to the site plan. So now they actually meet the code requirements for minimum parking. So I see that as an improvement in that there's not concern, they didn't need to reduce their parking requirements. Now it's basically providing the same amount of parking that any multifamily building would provide, developed under regular zoning or standard zoning. And then kind of as a consequence of having added a little bit more parking, their total landscape surface area did decrease from 54% down to 50%. Now ordinarily the code would require a minimum of 40%. So they're still providing well more green space above what we would normally see. And a large part of that is because they're providing underground parking. And so it reduces the amount of paving on the site. So, but I did want to note that there is a modest increase in landscape surface area with this change. They are not requesting any additional points of flexibility for this. It's basically all meets our code requirements. In addition to those clarifications that I already noted, I did include in this staff report a number of conditions, including a development agreement to work out how the dog exercise area or the dog park would work, as well as the parking on the south side of the site. And I just wanted to note too that the city engineer did have comments that would need to be addressed as part of this approval as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for staff? Hearing none. Are there Anything else that the petitioner would like to
Yeah.
include?
Ryan Cardinal Engineering, my predecessor who was up here on the agenda item for me has been obviously doing this longer than I think I've been alive. We are a local engineering firm representing the developer. We've been through this field a couple times, but they're a local developer owner. They are here to own and operate this long term. A couple of comments. The reason why we went through the parking, just to kind of give some clarification, when we went from, GDP is general broad strokes as we developed the plan, PIP is the details, just kind of the geometry of the site. It just worked out better to provide the spaces, just the symmetry of parking and making that happen. It works out better because you get actually above the two parking spaces per unit, which is just, it's better off for everybody. Like I said, they've been doing this a long time, so they've worked out, they need that around too. They've actually experienced needing less than that, but it meets the ordinance and it's overall better product. So that's why we decided to go ahead that route. The dog park, I'm glad you brought that up. We've met with staff a couple times. We're working on some type of agreement. Our goal is that it's open to the city. While I understand it's not the full city's wants for a dog park, it would be there and accessible because we're proposing to pave that parking that's on that south side that matches up to the city park. It'd be open and accessible to city residents as a whole, as opposed to just private for this apartment complex. I did have one, I guess I'm hoping it's just a clarification, Jackie, in your comments. It did say that this approval would expire at 5 years. The developer, they do these buildings in series, not parallel. So they take one crew and start doing the foundation work, and then they'll take that crew and start doing the second building. And so that the buildings themselves take a couple of years to build. So there is a scenario where that second building could be physically under construction at that 5 years. I just don't want to have to come back to get an approval for a building that's actively under construction. So I can just clarify that if it's actively under construction, we don't have to come back for that.
If it's actively under construction, I don't think you would. One thing, could I just add, like, the council can also extend, we could do a public hearing to extend that period if there's any danger. And that would be a pretty simple process.
Sure. We're not expecting it. I'm just saying that because they take a couple of years to build, there could be a window that second building is being finished in that 5 years. So. Thank you. I don't believe I have anything else. Any questions as far as the development goes?
Just a real quick clarification. Glad you're putting this dog park. Are the units back from?
Yes, you, absolutely. That's a good person. In all of your other developments.
Yeah, I know that there's a big demand for that. People love their pets.
Absolutely.
So I see that as a value.
Yeah, the upper level of these buildings are lofts. They actually have very high ceilings and it's very open and spacious, so to speak, for that type of resident.
Any other questions?
Great, thank you.
Hearing none, are there any other citizens who wish to speak at this time on this issue? Hearing none, I will close the public hearing and move on to item number 6.2. Request to consider plan infill development step 4, precise implementation plan PIP at 615 Farrell Avenue, located in the business local BL and residential multifamily -12 RM12 zoning districts to allow for a group development residential apartment complex in the area north of Delavan Fest Park, applicant Elkin Ridge Apartments.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to recommend approval of the proposed Falcon Ridge Apartments project, subject to the requirements of the submitted application, subject to the requirements of the general development plan, PID zoning, and the general city of Delavan zoning ordinance, and subject to listed conditions identified by staff the plan commission and the common council as approved by the common council. One, the planned infill development precise implementation plan for the proposed project shall be granted solely as approved by the common council. And two, prior to any site disturbance, a development agreement between the applicant and the city must be reviewed and approved by the common council regarding the dog park and parking pavement on the south side of the property. Additionally, the applicant shall submit details of proposed dog park fencing to staff for approval. 3, prior to any site disturbance, the subject parcels shall be combined by a certified survey map, CSM. 4, prior to any site disturbance, the applicant shall address all comments by the city engineer Baxter and Woodman in their staff memo dated August 30th, 2022. Modifications to the site, utilities, and or land use that are not specifically enabled by the approved GDP and PIP will require an amended PIP and potentially an amended GDP per the city's determination. 6, the city shall retain the right to inspect the subject property, including within the buildings, to ensure full compliance with the building code, the fire code, zoning ordinance, and the GDP and PIP and other government regulations. 7, any other conditions identified by the plan commission and or common council.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor of the motion signify by stating aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Item number 7 under business 7.1 is consider exterior signage colors in the downtown historical overlay district for 230 East Walworth Avenue within the downtown design overlay zoning district.
Hi, my name is John Neighbors. I own the box of burlap. We're just applying for a sign. This is Tim Janda. Tim has done many signs in his business. So I brought him along if there's any questions. What I'm proposing is to basically replace the former sign that was on the building that's approximately 64 feet long with a mural. So we would want to commission an artist to do a mural and then do our logo on top of the mural. There's a large area of common brick that doesn't match the facade of the building that's there. So it does need to be covered up. And in light of what the city has done with wall dogs, murals that are around the city, and just all the improvements, we thought it'd be cool to do something a little different, unique. And also playing under our art studio that we're going to have in the building, we felt it would be a good fit. That's it for me. Do you have any questions? I have a question. How do you plan on maintaining it as years go on? So the artist that would be doing it is a graffiti artist. So the materials that he uses, it will hold up to weather. The materials that we'll be using for the substrate or the material that is being painted on is MDO. So MDO is basically a plywood that's made for exterior. So I mean, it is still a material that can decompose, but our interest in what we're spending on it, I hope to maintain it with clear coats or, whatever recommendations from the sign company.
Yeah, so the main substrate cladding the wall where the common brick is will be medium density overlay. And then the lettering that'll be surface mounted will be high density urethane, which some of you might be familiar with. It's pretty typical sort of an exterior signage. Yes, sir.
Yep. So the preliminary concept is titled placeholder mural image, right?
Yes.
Generally, aren't we asked to respond to design signs?
Staff, you want to chime in at this point? I thought there had been some.
I think we can try it, and Tease apologizes, he cannot be here tonight, he had a family emergency. I guess that's up to you guys as to how you want to have that conversation. The staff's question, I guess, to the committee is this even a concept you want to consider as like a mural background? You know, if you want them to come back with specifics, I guess that's discussion that the downtown design overlay committee, which is you, needs to have with the applicant.
Just a quick follow-up. The artist that's going to be doing the mural, is this something that they do freeform, or is this something that they could replicate or scale down to give us something to look at? Doesn't have to be completely fleshed out, but I think that
Just an idea.
something where we can look at it.
So I sent in my application rendering of, actually some of that imagery was his artwork. Right?
Yeah.
So this is his actual artwork?
Yes.
Okay.
So is that what?
So it would be similar in style, but to actually have him draw up a mock, we would have to commission him.
So, great, that answered my question, but the question is, what I don't understand, and I'm sorry, I just want to clarify with staff, the motion requested is to approve colors, which I don't understand.
And the colors are.
Like, the color is one thing, but yeah.
You already have a color palette.
I think that T's impression was that because it was a historical district, he wanted to not necessarily, he wanted to go through a formal process so that we were at least in a position to understand that you guys had approved what we did. So I would assume you're going to tell me what colors to stay away from. In the conversation with T, it was iridescent or high visibility type colors, things like that, but I don't know if there's any other specifics outside of that.
I thought we had a historic palette.
There's marking to the signs.
Does that apply to signs?
There was a palette.
Yes, there is it's the historic colors palette, yes. So I guess, yes, there is specific colors, then Jackie can jump in, there are specific colors, neons, black is not an acceptable color, and pure white is not an acceptable color. But it's historic colors which the commission has approved in the past as a historic color palette.
So that's what I understood, and my question is, have you guys seen that palette?
I have seen the palette. I would say that I would be asking to go outside of that palette
Okay.
because it would be very hard to tell an artist with blending and shading to be able to maintain those true colors that are in that palette.
Got it. So I think we're not in a position without understanding range to act. But if you're asking us, would we give permission on this space to have a sense of difference? Or, I mean, I don't think that the murals conform to the downtown palette, Liz.
And I thought.
So I'll give you an
Yeah.
example. There's a blue building on the corner
Right.
that the mural on the rear of that building does not conform to the historic colors.
This is a palette of dozens of colors, hundreds of colors, thousands of
No,
colors?
it's a limited
It's
to.
limited.
True.
No,
So-
it's probably 16.
I thought some of the changes in the overall sign ordinance was to allow for more creativity. I think I'm only one person, but I think what you're trying to do and be creative is and it fits your scheme with the artistic. So I think some more information, but yeah, get a rendering.
So
Modernize it.
Well, I would just point out that I've been through this for 25 years, okay? From the first downtown revival, well, not the first, but the second downtown revival.
The most modern one.
committee. And the fact of the matter is, we've got this notion that downtown Delavan looked like a Victorian Walt Disney vision. And I brought great pictures of downtown Delavan as a 1950s neon zone. And so I think there's a point at which this has, if it's our responsibility, I forgot what the downtown design overlay district board or whatever, but if it's our responsibility, we need to update it.
Or, I mean, at the least, I mean, I feel if we have better information, I'm always, if something comes to us, I'm always willing to listen and take into consideration going outside of what is standard.
So because I've been involved on your side, looking at presenting concepts, right? I mean, as you looked at the page to us, placeholder image, if you were asking for reactions to that and believed that you were gonna stay congruous to that in form, is that what you're looking for? Some kind of perspective that that's cool?
Yes.
So,
Are you gonna try to do, are you gonna try to do more like local type things in the mural, or?
The artist shared
What is
with
the
me that
theme?
his vision was native birds and plants.
Oh, okay, that to me is better than a unicorn.
His artist.
His I was a little bit
so-
pulled back on that,
Yeah.
usually arts and colony and that type of stuff, okay, but that unicorn scared me. So it's nice that you're gonna, and there's a lizard on here too, and we really don't have any of those around here, so.
yeah, we do, but we killed them all.
Yes. So, and then I don't even know what that is, maybe a seal?
Yeah, all of those images are basically were extracted from a project that he and I collaborated with on a public school in the Bronx.
And that probably works out great there.
Well, it was just to demonstrate the point of the sign / mural could be something along these lines, you know.
I personally like the idea of
So do I.
something a little different.
Especially with the nature of the business underneath it, I think it showcases it.
And it's much better than the old red.
I actually love that Schultz Brothers.
I did-
Dive
I did
Dime.
too.
I'm sorry.
I did too.
That brings
You've
back
got some
memories,
original
it brings back
signage.
my it was probably 25 cents back then. My parents said I could go down in the basement and pick something out. You know, I'd spend all my time down there where they're upstairs.
Do you
So
still
I
have the panels? I think
Hey.
you gotta buy
I
them.
have a lot of
The price just went up.
My wife would kill me, even if you gave it to me, she'd kill me.
We'd find a way. We did seal the sign in the building, so it will stay.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So
You want an official?
is there a sense of the body? I mean, there's no motion to be made here, right?
No.
I'm in favor of this.
I think some more renders, I don't know who
Well,
said it.
but-
earlier.
but-
Talking about the cost.
But so we were scared for the city to spend $15,000. Him commissioning this, instead of in application, I would contend places a undue, much larger burden on a private business person with the $15,000 we were talking on a city for a amendment to a TID plan. So my perspective would be that the staff should look at it, that the plan commission likes the concept in general, right?
As long as you don't end up putting anything lewd on
No unicorns?
there. Just that one scared me.
No lewd unicorn.
And I think what came out of the conversation was, can,
I'm up next. Okay.
Terms of the intent, and the intent changes based on artist. So the intent.
I'm talking
is
about
staying
the downtown
historical,
palette.
right, but that in itself, the downtown palette fits with the idea of what is our interpretation of what the downtown should look like. And that follows artistic intent, which is challenging to document, and put on paper, and then convey to future generations.
Jackie?
While we were talking, I took a moment to look into the ordinances and the downtown palette that we use for buildings does not apply to signs in the downtown. Although I think there might be value in looking at that palette again. And then we also have a section of our sign code, and we updated that a few years ago to allow any colors used for downtown character signs, which were the more creative signs that I think was.
That's what I got.
but it limits the number of colors per sign?
don't think so.
The downtown ordinance the sign, the downtown overlay does, but I believe that this downtown character sign thing is intended to override that.
And that's what I was getting at with my remarks earlier, that when we did those changes, it was to allow for more creativity in the signage, so.
Well, it's refreshing to know that we're still on the same page.
So in other words, you would say that we have a conflict in the ordinance because one of the signs.
Like, yeah, I didn't explain that very well. Basically, the ordinance does limit the number of colors you can use on signs in the downtown.
Right.
However, there is a specifically created section of the sign ordinance that allows you to deviate from the ordinance, and it lays out what types of ways you can deviate from the ordinance, including color.
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
It was just.
It overrides. It was not an oversight. It was written to allow flexibility from the ordinance. Creating the signs.
I didn't write that one.
I would.
Yes, Mark.
Perhaps the committee just wishes to have T review this and approve it at a staff level, or do you want to bring this?
Yes.
I think that's a,
Yes.
I think there's a good
That's
consensus.
what
I
Kevin
think,
was going towards.
yeah, and
Thank you.
I think that seems, because everyone's
Right.
stood with the consensus, and
And open.
we'll go that route.
Yes, and open. We want to go there.
Yes, soon.
Yeah, good.
Sweets away.
You don't sign it, we'll come in.
Okay.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Look,
Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate it.
Then moving on to item 7.2 is review a second step concept plan request to amend the current planned infill development for the Slumberland Wright Street location to expand the indoor storage land use.
You didn't make,
Mr. Chair?
you didn't make a motion on the last, where you not?
Yeah, we just had the consensus.
Okay, okay.
I asked if
Mr.
everyone
Chair?
was okay with the consensus. Yes, Ken.
On 7.2, if I recall the minutes correctly, we identified that there was a need for the developer to present themselves.
I think that's, but thank you.
Yep, I'm here. Thank you. Can everybody hear me okay?
yes.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for letting me be here today. So, back a few years ago now, I think almost 3, we were able to go through a process with you where pre-COVID, where we took part of the plaza and we agreed we were going to do storage, and the other part of the plaza we were going to be what I'll call and continue to be a retail center. Most recently, one of our anchor tenants, Slumberland, decided to move across the street into a bigger location, leaving us with a big hole. In the meantime, as we all know, COVID has changed the landscape of where we are and where we live. And so we are allowed under our current plan to build an addition on the back of the building, but economically that is very challenging. And we have had feelers out for a while now to find a tenant for the Slumberland space. And to date, we've fallen willfully short. And we feel like we're going to continue to fall willfully short in that area. However, the storage business is basically at capacity and literally turning residents of the community away because we don't have certain sizes and types of units that they need. So what we'd like for everybody to consider is allowing us to use that Slumberland space as additional storage in order to continue to keep the mall, or the plaza, I'm sorry, generating revenue so we can continue to reinvest into the plaza year after year. So, I mean, we're trying, I know we'd have to go through the whole process of a new plan, but before we wasted time and effort and resources on our end, as well as wasted your time, the feeling kind of was we wanted to see where the council stood as to this request.
Thanks, Scott. Any questions for Scott?
I have a couple of questions. As I understand it, you were approved to do an expansion behind the existing CubeSmart. Can you tell us why that hasn't happened and now you're looking at just expanding further into the building? I'm assuming that it's because of costs and it's just far cheaper to just take over existing space, but my question is, if this was economically driven and you are indeed at capacity as you're claiming, didn't you just purchase an area over in Beloit, and put up a brand new facility?
Over where, I'm sorry?
Like,
We don't have any other facilities any other land that we own in Wisconsin other than the Delavan Plaza.
that's interesting because I just went over to CubeSmart and I spoke to the manager. And he said that they have areas over in Kenosha and Beloit.
Okay, so that's the tenant. We're the owner of the property.
Ah, I see. Thank you. That clarifies things a little bit.
So, and just to further clarify, we own a part of our store. So I don't want to mislead you. We own part of the economics of the CubeSmart store, but CubeSmart is a national brand that has kind of like let's call it a McDonald's franchise. So they have their own direct owned stores, and then they have, local mom and pop or developer owned stores, and we're one of their developer owned stores.
Well, quite frankly, I have major concerns involving putting up cube storage facilities within the livable space of a city that is growing. This is a place to live and do things, not store things. So it is on a major thoroughway, and I am less likely to be inclined to approve something like that, knowing the location of it and the potential that it has to increase value for the people that live here, the people that work here. As I understand it, it's only employing one person. So that's not generating anything for the community other than a place to store your things. And in terms of capacity, again, this is based on my conversation today. You're at 90% capacity and that flexes down, or at least they're at 90%, that flexes down during the winter months. And it's never really at 100% capacity because they change the price appropriately depending on how much demand is. They'll increase the price whenever the demand goes up, and they decrease it whenever there's a ton of storage space available. But that's their business model, and I'm not here to argue that. My concern is that they're taking up space that should be used for the residents to be able to shop, do things. Slumberland was great. They were a great tenant. I understand your business model is to make sure that you have tenants that are paying due rent and they're actually generating value for you. And I see that, but I'm not in favor of allowing expansion for more cube businesses within a city's limits. I think that that's far too close to the other areas where people want to shop.
Okay, so let me address a couple of your concerns or your comments. So first of all, you have in a letter that I sent you, I think over 30 acres of land available for retail development. And including all the space near the Fleet Farm, which has been around since we moved in. And not one retailer has taken advantage of building anything or growing along that corridor. And well, I would tell you, yes, we're on a busy road. As you and I both know, the retail corridor for the city has shifted dramatically off of Wright Street and onto I think it's Route 50, right across from where the Fleet Farm is. So that would be my number one comment. My number two comment is, well, we have two employees that work there, a full-time and a part-time person. We also generate sales tax revenue for the city and town. The more value the property has, you increase my taxes every year. So if I have more revenue being generated in my plaza, when you look at tax assessments, that those tenants impact how you look at my tax assessment. And then the other comment I would say to you is, well, they do fluctuate price up and down. They do that so that we don't get over capacity, but I can assure you that we have people coming in every day that want storage. And if your town is growing, you're only going to need, along with other things like more police or more fire department, personnel, or bigger hospital, you're also going to need more storage for these people. You just heard a minute ago how you're going to add an apartment building with multiple other apartment units. Those are one of the key people that when they rent an apartment, they typically need somewhere to store their goods. And so I'm not sure why anyone would view this as a detriment. I just re-signed Tractor Supply to a 10-year lease, to another 10 years, or I'm sorry, 10 years on their lease. We have 8 years left on the dollar store there. So we're not, and we didn't want Slumberland to leave. They chose to leave on their own because we couldn't provide them with additional space. And there's not 25,000 square foot people knocking on our door to become tenants. We have just potentially, as Mark could tell you, leased the space next to the office to someone that wants to build an ice cream shop there. But you're talking about 2,000 square feet. There's not a lot of 25,000 square foot users in a city of 10,000 people, unfortunately. And if there were, we would gladly take them.
Cool, go ahead, Chris.
I honestly have seen many buildings in the city be empty. Staples has been empty for eons. I would rather see the building be used than not be used. That's my personal opinion. At least there's something for it. This goes to my personal beliefs. If you own the building within some restrictions, I don't think necessarily we should hinder what you want to produce in that building within reason. So I don't foresee a problem on my side.
When I'm looking at this, I'm not just looking at it in terms of value, dollars and cents. I'm looking at this in terms of scope. The value for me is, what does this look like for generations? Generations of city growth doesn't necessarily sit and hinge around storage facilities. That's not what we see. We see parks, we see other areas, we see things like that. Anybody that needs storage facilities will seek them out, and they do every time they need one.
I think this is a case where, just like the consideration in 2020, where there's a motion related to watching what the city saw as prime commercial no longer be viable as retail prime commercial. And it's, with all due respect to Scott, it's not just COVID, it's the change in how Americans buy or experiences and goods. And I'm very sensitive to his experience that we would like, and I'm putting words in Scott's mouth, we would like a higher value retail rental. Okay, but we don't see it. It's not happening, right? We know from looking at the length of time that other developers, retail developers are taking on already approved large scale projects, that this stuff isn't happening the way we might wish it. And so I think that the plan commission and the council should listen very respectfully, and also sensitively to the economics of the real estate owner in this case, about ensuring that there is a use for this property that might be different than what we wished. And so consequently, I think, based upon my experiences in, overcapacity in commercial retail, that the city should be open to considering this extension of this storage stuff. I think, however, that that being said, a commercial center full of storage doesn't need the impervious asphalt around it in an unrepaired and unredeveloped fashion that this center needs. And I think if the owner is convinced that the best long-term and immediate course for this property is in storage, then we shouldn't just approve the use of the 25,000 feet for storage. We ought to say, we want a whole project plan on how you turn this into an appropriate storage facility. So, Matt, with all due respect, driving down 75 to Florida, okay, prime interstate intersection corners with 5-6-story, several 100,000 square feet U-Haul pod storage facilities.
I know.
Right? And to me, that's a demonstration of the economic need of our citizens today for that kind of stuff. What I would say is if the potential applicant wants to move forward, I would say, we ought to listen to them. We ought to understand their economic case, but we ought to ask that it's not just, we're going to fill out the old facility with pods and stuff like that, but it's now going to become a storage center and we're going to redevelop it appropriately.
That I can get more behind. The idea of turning it into, like you said, when you're driving on the freeway and you see these massive structures, but they're on the freeway. They're not in the major metropolitan areas. They're removed. And they're pods, which are going to be placed and then stored and then moved to different locations. Because the pod storage process it's transient. It moves to wherever it's needed to be. But this is something where people are going to come as a destination. And I'm not interested in looking at Delavan as a destination for storage. I think that is disingenuous to the people that live here. And I think that is a major concern. That's something that I want to make sure if we're going to look at this, we're going to look at this right. And we should be looking at it from a long-term perspective, not a quick fix of, I didn't want to spend the money to do the development. I think that we should be doing the development the right way. And if it takes a longer period of time in order to actually get the supply chain in line to be able to get everything done the correct way, then so be it.
And if I would move us back to the 2020 plan, if I recall it correctly, it called for the redevelopment and relocation of the dollar store from the old Walgreens bay into a standalone building in front, right? And I think it would be interesting to hear from the potential applicant a whole redesign of that center that said, let's move the Dollar Tree out front. Let me redevelop this section in the back as storage. Let me reorient the parking so that the parking makes sense for the retail centers. And it's just not an asphalt jungle in front of that facility. I think I, as one member, would listen to that. But I am sensitive to the economic problems of trying to.
And let me just interject a couple more points. So, and Mark is aware of this. We have identified 2 other parcels there that we can subdivide off as additional retail pieces, like standalone stores like the O'Reilly's is. The reason that the dollar store is not moved to the out parcel is candidly, they're quite happy where they are. And so they don't really want to move, but we have been actively looking for someone to take that first out parcel, you know, as a spot for us to build a building to accommodate them. We're also not asking, or would we want to turn that into, in some respects, what some people have maybe a little bit alluded to, like a spot where pods are being thrown all over the parking lot, or people are parking boats and RVs outside, and it just becomes a big, you know, in some respects, dumping ground. We're certainly aware and cognizant of that, and that's not part of our business plan, nor would we want it to be, to do something like that. And then the other thing I would say to you is, well, there are storage facilities, I'm sure, all over the state. I feel, you know, for Delavan, we're a little unique. Climate controlled storage is a big deal for people. It keeps their goods safe and secure over a non-climate controlled traditional type storage unit. So that's why a lot of people have come to us, because they like that. And the other thing I would say is, people don't want to put their storage, store their goods 20 or 30 miles away from their house. People like, if you look at studies that we've done, typically a storage facility is good for a 3 to 5 mile radius, is where pretty much 90% of your customers come from. And I would also tell you that we have a fair number of what I would call commercial customers, because the guy that's, you know, growing, but he hasn't got to this point of an addition yet, but he needs somewhere to store all of his, you know, last 5 years of tax records, rents units from us. We have pharmaceutical people that store their samples in our storage facilities. We have small contractors that store their overflow that doesn't, you know, because the wife wants to park the car in the garage. So they store their overflow in our storage units. So these units serve, to me, a very important aspect of a community, to allow people to have a climate controlled area where to store their goods, and to use not just for, you know, their Christmas decorations, you know, they're using it for other things. Businesses use it. Like I said, it's more than just, in fact, in Saginaw, Michigan, and I don't want to go off on a huge tangent because I know this has been a long night, but one of our biggest renters in Saginaw, Michigan is actually the city. They took all of like their, what I'd call their emergency stuff for, you know, let's say a flood or something, or, you know, they were going to have a picket line and they needed fencing, temporary fences to put up. I think they have 6 storage units from us. They rent 6 storage units from us, and they store all sorts of overflow storage things that the city now doesn't have to have a building for. They just rent the unit, and when they're done renting the unit, there's no lease, so they can leave within a month. So it becomes a very friendly, needed thing for the community. And in some respects, it's unfortunate that the world has gone that way, but it's the world we live in today. So I think we have to do it. And I'm absolutely more than glad to put redo the plan and put an entire plan in front of you of what we would like it to look like over the long haul, so that we don't have to keep doing this coming back and forth in front of you. So, and I do appreciate your thoughts, and if anybody does have any other questions, I'll be quiet again now.
Thanks, Scott. I want to do you have any other comments or questions? I want to get some other feedback, and then
I basically agree with what's been said.
I guess I'd suggest we Put it on the next agenda.
I will say, I want to just back up for a little bit, because obviously this is providing feedback. I hope you're getting some good feedback, Scott. You know,
Yeah.
I obviously said in one of the staff meetings, you know where I came from on some of this stuff, but for the benefit of the commission, I want to hit on one point in particular as we followed up, or as we finished up that staff meeting that I have yet to hear you say anything about, which was the concept of downsizing the square footage and keeping the street facade and the windows facing the street, maybe a 4,000 to 5,000, 6,000 square foot. Where are you at with that potentially? Because last month you were supposed to join us and you were on the agenda for feedback and there.
Yeah, I apologize. There was some
Okay. I know people say different things
miscommunication.
come
and-
up. No
and to
worries.
answer-
But one thing that I want to say is that we have seen actually empty spaces being filled. In fact, last month, if you had joined us, we filled in the former GameStop building with retail type business. I think you know where I pointed out was, I know you alluded to the fact that Slumberland left. Well, they had no intention of leaving. I think we need to be upfront of that. It wasn't until someone had stopped in and was gonna raise the rent that they even started looking. Fortunately for us, they looked at an empty storefront, a rather big space, and they got more footage at a less retail price. And so they stayed within our community, which I think is a benefit. That said, I think I was on the city council, I was an alderman when you barely got approval to start what you had started. And I get, we had COVID, we had some of these other, the models are changing and things, but I still would like to see where you've actively, and I told you this months ago, where you've you said verbally you've marketed this space, but I'd like to see where and for how, you're not showing me how much, but I just want to know that for sure, one, there is, I mean, you can say you've actively marketed it, but I'd like to know where, and more importantly, I think that if we, finding common ground and collaboration, the concept was potentially downsizing. You haven't mentioned anything about that. Is that out? And then
No, it's not out. And just so everybody's clear, one of the thoughts we talked about with the staff and the mayor was to take the frontage of the facility where the Slumberland was, and to leave that part as retail, and only expand the storage in the back of the Slumberland. There's some logistical issues that I'm still trying to work through. And not to get into a long drawn out thing, but you don't want to people aren't going to park at a door and then have to walk their stuff more than X. And the industry standard of X is 150 feet. So if I don't have some type of frontage where I can get some people to be able to unload there, is problematic. And it's easy to say, well, we could put a little walkway in for people to do that and still leave some retail in the front. But I think if you got somebody in the middle of a plaza parked in the, we'll call it the inner ring road, it's unloading their storage van to get to the front of their space with retail 5 feet away on either side. It's going to really interfere with those retail people, and they're probably not going to like it. So I'm trying to figure out, it's not a dead issue, trust me, but I'm trying to figure out a way to make it work, so that the retail people won't be unhappy with the final product. If we could, so I'm trying to figure that out. So
I appreciate it. I just didn't agree. Chris, I just wanted to finish my point for it.
Yeah, that was okay. I'm really not trying to be difficult, but I think necessarily what he charges for rent and potentially who's he'd been looking for to get the place.
Right,
That's not ours.
right, and that's why I said I didn't need to see how much. I just wanna know that it's being marketed. I mean, it's just
Right,
to
and
say that you're marketing it.
But that's all we're gonna get. I mean,
Right.
because for him, and for us to sit there and say who would be marketed it to, that's none of our business.
Right.
Because people come to the city staff and give you guys a proposal and you don't even, which I'm not saying we should, but we're not even informed of that because it's in the early stages. So I think for that to happen, I think is asking too much, honestly.
I appreciate that.
Well,
One thing that I really think is important, and nobody's asked this yet, is are all of step one requirements fulfilled and are they done? Yeah, I mean, if we're gonna start talking about step two and other phases, but we haven't even completed the first step. What, I mean, I just wanna know, and maybe they haven't fulfilled. I just wanna know from staff if we've addressed the conditions and the issues that we were gonna address in step one.
I'd have to take another look just to be totally sure, but my recollection is that the concept is pretty loose. So I think it's a lot of leeway in that.
Right.
So I think from what I'm seeing here, it seems to be enough to move on to kind of give them direction for the next step.
Okay, I just wanted.
Well, let me interject and answer your question, Mayor, because I want to be honest with everybody. So there were several things that we needed to do. I believe they've all been addressed, but one, and the one that that has not been addressed is we were going to extend some sidewalk along the frontage of Wright Street. But what we were trying to do is incorporate that extension of sidewalk with the building of the out parcel that we thought, the dollar people would take. But so there is some sidewalk work on the front of that, that does still need to be addressed. And and we can certainly add that to the plan and make sure that it's addressed appropriately. And I know Mark is keenly aware of what items need to be addressed. And I don't know if I've missed anything or not, Mark, but have I?
That's the big one, yes, sidewalk.
Yeah. So I know we definitely need to, if the dollar people aren't going to move out there, we should get the sidewalk done. And I am aware of that, and we will get that done, and we can do that as part of this new plan.
Thank you. That's what I was looking to clarify.
Yeah, no problem. Well, what I think, I guess I just want to conclude by, I appreciate everybody's feedback. I greatly do. I'm going to hire a professional, like we did last time, to get working on the paperwork and such, to do a redesign here. And I'll work with staff on their thoughts, so it incorporates their comments. And then hopefully in a couple of months, I'll be back to you with a new design that'll meet everybody's, meet everybody's desires. And so I appreciate everybody's time tonight.
Thank you, Scott.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
With that, we'll move on to item 7.3, which is consider a single lot land redivision request by certified survey map CSM to combine the 3 tax parcels along Farrell Avenue at Phoenix Street.
This ties into one of the requirements for the Falcon Ridge, which was just approved earlier tonight. What you have in your packet is a very preliminary draft with some things they need to change. Technically, this does not need to come to Planning Commission because they're not creating a lot. They're actually taking 3 and making a 1. But we thought we'd bring it forward too. They do have to make some corrections with the right-of-way they've got drawn incorrectly, and they should actually erase the old easements that are on there, the cross parking easements, because those were deleted or vacated several years back. But wish to make a recommendation to approve it, that'd be great. Now we can.
So moved.
Second.
There's a motion and second, any further discussion?
He's not here.
Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor of the motion signify by stating aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign, motion passes. Item number 8, update on building and zoning related matters. As Chris pointed out, he's not necessarily here, but.
Oh, you can hear that?
Yeah.
Oh, your microphones pick up really good.
But I don't know if anyone has any questions. even though-
They're building lots of houses out behind the high school.
I think we issued four or five more permits here in the last couple of weeks. A lot of dirt moving both on Arbor Ridge and on Lake Lawn at Arbor Club.
Well, if there is no further business, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion and second, all in favor of adjournment, signify by stating aye.
Aye.